to convene the joint City Council and Finance Advisory Committee meeting,
But thank you.
May 20th. We're continuing discussion of the fiscal 2016 budget. I'll call the meeting to order and ask for a roll call, please. Okay. Let me convene the meeting of City Council and Finance Advisory Committee and ask for a roll call.
Jacobson, Fanouken, Marquardt,
Here.
Snow,
Here.
Noriko,
Here.
Baker,
Here.
O'Leary, Ray,
Here?
Peddle,
Here.
Golden,
Here.
Terazinski,
Here.
Conlon, Verbic,
Here.
Neely,
Here.
Gerhart. 11 present.
Thank you. And Alderman Jacobson has joined us. Alderman Fanouken has notified me he's expected to join us about 6:45 in progress. With that, let me turn to Finance Director Haley to begin our discussion this evening on capital budget discussions. Kathy?
So we're going to pick up from Saturday and have John Laskowski start with capital as it relates to our streets.
Welcome home from Mexico.
Thank you very much. Sorry I was late.
John was in Mexico working with Engineers Without Borders.
That's right, yeah. I was working with Engineers Without Borders trying to make the drinking water a little cleaner for everybody down there.
Thank you.
Let's see. I'd just like to welcome the members of the City Council and the Finance Advisory Committee to the meeting. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about street maintenance and my street maintenance analysis. Just a few remarks on streets in general. It's often kind of an overlooked part of the infrastructure, although we all use it just about every single day. So it doesn't have the sirens and the lights that some of the other departments have, but when you back out of your driveway or just take a trip to the store, every day that you're using the road network in town. And it provides a conduit for economic development, and it also provides a safe way of getting our emergency services to and from their emergencies. So with that being said, I'll give you an update from last year's presentation to where we are now. Last year, the data that we collected from the Infrastructure Management Services, which is our consulting firm, they provided us data on both our surface and subsurface conditions within the TIF district. However, the streets outside the TIF district did not have the subsurface data. So to give you a quick reference of the TIF district on this exhibit right here, the highlighted areas are the TIF district. Every area that's in white outside of it falls outside of the TIF district. So we now have that complete data. We are confident that we can assign a pavement index number to each and every street segment throughout town. So we're officially comparing apples to apples now. The other thing that is not such good news is the cost of street maintenance based on this new data has increased since last year. So what our results are is that street maintenance now, to maintain the pavement condition in the service condition it is now, would require $9 million a year. So when I reference level of service, I'm kind of referring to the pavement condition. So the potholes or the cracks or the bumps you feel when you drive down the road on an average street, that's considered the pavement condition or level of service. In order to maintain the road system over the next 5 years, over a short-term plan, would require us to allocate $45 million. In the past, from 1992 to 2014, on average, we've allocated approximately $814,000.
John?
Yes.
If you could go back to that slide. Now, if costs did not change, are we to understand that this short-term plan would leave us after 5 years, we would be maintaining the system at the current level? In order to continue to do that, if costs didn't change, you would need another $9 million a year. Is that a reasonable assumption or no?
If we had, so are you saying like $18 million total, or are you
No,
saying?
what I'm saying is, 5 years, let's say that's 2020. So
Okay.
in 2021, if we wanted to maintain the streets, we would have to continue making that investment.
Over time, the model only projects for 5 years. However, what my
Understood.
experience is once you bring the system up to that level where you're maintaining it, there are gonna be costs that are gonna decrease slightly as a result of getting some of those roads that need to be reconstructed up to an area of maintenance. So what I'm saying is, it'll become more apparent later in the presentation when I show the maintenance curve.
All right, why don't I just let you continue that?
Okay.
Thank you.
So, where am I at? Okay, so over,
John, Alderman Baker has a
yes,
question.
I'm sorry.
Over the years, whenever we had major projects that were brought to the council to be priced, the question was thrown out, why don't we just use concrete like Sycamore did downtown, pay the little upcharge for that, because you get 50 years instead of 20 years? Is this just for blacktop resurfacing as we go, or is this completely rebuilding a lot of the roads, this 45 million? This is astronomical compared to
Yeah.
anything that's ever been suggested.
It's a combination of both reconstruction and pavement maintenance, and there are advantages to concrete streets, and using concrete would probably be best used as an alternative when you're looking at a reconstruction. You're not going to want to, obviously, you don't want to take a street that needs a mill and an overlay of 2 inches and then dig the whole thing up and throw concrete down in its place, because you can extend the life of that bituminous surface a little bit longer by just doing preventative maintenance as we go. Concrete streets in general do have a longer lifespan than bituminous. It's going to be one of those things where you have to determine on an annual basis what the cost of concrete is, the cost of construction associated with concrete, and maybe look at it over a 30-year period and see how much maintenance will you be doing on those asphalt streets in a 30-year period, and does that total cost exceed the cost of the one-time 30-year cost that a concrete street might require. So that is analysis that we would perform when we do reconstruction. This analysis primarily addresses, this analysis solely looks at bituminous streets, and the reason it looks only at those streets is because over 97% of our street network is asphalt right now.
Okay, just one of the things that's going to be going through my mind is that and I think we've been warned of this many times, that we were just Band-Aiding instead of doing what we should have been doing, and money was being, as Ron Naylor used to say, stolen from the motor fuel tax fund just to fund the general fund all these years. It was never presented to us in such a shock as what you're doing, and maybe we don't have any choice but to bond out over a 20-year period this 5-year immediate fix that has to be done. And if we're doing that, I mean, I guess it's pretty obvious that many of our streets are eroded. There's potholes everywhere. People, if the pothole isn't fixed, they're ruining their wheels and tires. And I've received nothing but complaints in the last 2 weeks. In fact, that's all anybody's called me about to really complain, other than don't raise taxes. I've got an open mind, but I'm ready to dig deep and think about a bond to fix things right, because this is deferred maintenance.
And John, the scenarios you're presenting this evening, option one is the $9 million investment.
Yeah.
And that covers 192 overlays and 28 reconstructions
That's correct.
of bituminous surface
Yeah, that,
roads.
right.
Okay, thank you. And then each alternative or option, we can see the number of overlays and the number of reconstructions anticipated.
Associated with each
Thank
scenario,
you.
correct. Yes,
I see where we use as a benchmark the condition of the streets as they are today. I'm wondering, how does that, our condition of the streets today compare with the national average? Or, why is that the benchmark that's being used? Are our streets good? Are they bad? I haven't seen
Sure.
any justification as to what our current condition is and why we should maintain it at our current position.
based on the IMS, let's see if I can get to that real quick. So on our pavement ratings, our average street is 78. So that means that we're just under a satisfactory condition of the roadways. I believe that the level of service that we have right now could be improved, and I think if we take the initial steps to dedicate to take a proactive step and start allocating funding to streets in a way that it could be sustainable, we'll be able to maintain the streets with less money in the future at the same level. And that's because right now we are facing a situation where there's a lot of roads that are that need to be reconstructed. In order to reconstruct a road, it costs 4 times as much as it does to do preventative maintenance on it. Once we get those roads that are in terrible condition up to the point of where we're just doing preventive maintenance on them, it's going to reduce the maintenance cost overall. In order to, I think a lot of it depends on the citizens and what we value and how we compare with adjacent communities. Is this level of service, this paving condition out here acceptable to our citizens? Is this something that could be improved, and could we draw economic development to the area if our streets were in better condition? Based on Alderman Baker's remarks, if he's getting concerns from citizens, I would contend that maybe the expectations are for the roads to be in a bit of better condition.
John, oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. When you are using the term, the existing level of service,
Yes.
are you saying existing level of service as in chart 1, that we leave 10% of the streets in failing condition? Or are you saying current condition in the sense that we try to average a pavement grade of 78?
We're going to try to average a pavement grade of 78.
Okay.
Yes.
How often does a street have to be totally reconstructed?
It depends on how frequently you perform maintenance on it. So kind of looking, and I guess this curve is going to help answer Dr. Petal's question a little bit better as well. So the average life of a street could be up to 15 years. At the point it fails, if you do no maintenance on it whatsoever. We try to capture the streets at the point at which the green curve ends, because beyond that point, the cost of maintenance increases by about 4 times. So you're spending $4 to $1 of maintenance once you get into the red section to the point of where it's kind of pink. So the relationship between maintenance and time is not a linear one, and that's the reason why the increased costs occur at that particular time.
As I'm seeing Engineer Laskowski jumping forward in his presentation to address our questions, I'd like to suggest, let's let John get back on track and then accumulate our questions at the end of the presentation. We can certainly address those. And if something urgently strikes you, please don't hesitate to raise that, but be cognizant that John does have a planned sequence.
Okay, so thank you, Mayor Ray. The grants received just indicate over time the amount of money that we've received from various state and federal sources. In 2007, that peaked, and that was a result of some grants we received from Denny Hastert, as well as some funds through the Metropolitan Planning Organization. What this slide kind of shows is that we've taken there's a steep fall that took place in 2014, and what we're kind of forecasting and what we've seen with the new political climate in the state is that these grants are going to be more competitive in the future, and there's not going to be nearly as many of them. So it's not a reliable or sustainable funding source for the roads. The one grant that we did receive was for $70,000 for a TARP grant, truck access reconstruction program, which allows the road to be increased in thickness for truck traffic to travel across it. The grant we received was $80,000, but the entire cost of the project was going to be about $760,000. So it's one of those things where you really have to consider if that's going to be a good investment of our money.
John, in addition to state grants drying up, back in 2007, I believe there was an end to earmark funds at the federal level, where representatives had a pool of money that they could allocate to their respective districts.
Yeah,
And I have the impression that's where some of that money from Dennis Hastert's projects came from.
Yeah, I think it was part of, between 2007 and 2009, I think that might have been part of the ARRA funding.
Okay.
So it would have been, I believe, that similar
Thank
pool
you.
of funds. This slide just shows an expenditures by revenue source. So in the first, in the blue, you'll see what's considered to be the aggregate funding source. So in those years, we did not have a breakdown of where the funding was coming from. So it's just totaled in general. Starting in 2000, the MFT money and the TIF money was found to be providing most of the revenue for street maintenance and improvements. In 2008, there was the introduction of the local gas tax, and that supplemented both the MFT and the TIF funding for roads. In 2013 and 2014, there was no MFT money included in the road maintenance projects. Rather, we were relying heavily on TIF funding to fund our road projects. And the TIF funding, again, is only available for use within the shaded area. So there's a large part of the town that doesn't have access to that money for use to maintain their roadways. So 80% of our roads, in fact, are in the unshaded area. 20% of these roads are within the shaded green and yellow areas on that map. So kind of explaining how the categorization of the streets works. The streets, on the next slide, you're going to see pie charts, and each piece of that pie is going to be in red, yellow, and green. The ratings we have from IMS rate from 0 to 59 are considered streets that need immediate attention and are failing. These would be the reconstruction streets. Streets in yellow are streets that need maintenance to prevent them from deteriorating further into this reconstruction zone. And streets in green are 80 and above and have a satisfactory performance level. So this is the pie chart that represents our overall street network in the city of DeKalb. This includes both TIF streets and non-TIF streets. 50% of our streets are in satisfactory condition, 40% are in the pre-failing condition or streets that could use maintenance. These are kind of the streets that, as I was showing that curve a little while ago, fall in that green section. These are the roads we want to target for maintenance and get them into the cycle where we're spending a reasonable amount of money before they fall into this red section where it becomes a reconstruction project.
John, is that by street mile, or is that by just First Street is equal to?
Sure. This is by square yards, so it's area. This slide demonstrates the pavement index of the TIF streets and the non-TIF streets. So if you take a look, what you're wondering maybe is, okay, the pavement index for the TIF streets is at 76. We've been spending a lot of money in the TIF districts. Why does this have a lower rating than the pavement index of the non-TIF streets at 78? So the reasons I identified for this include the TIF streets had been in poor condition prior to the start of the maintenance on them. So we weren't starting from the same baseline. Grants have been supplementing the pavement in the non-TIF streets. So the projects that we've had in the past, the Peace Road Bridge project, Fairview Widening, Bethany Road Bridge, these projects were all supplemented. These projects were all provided with some form of grant funding. So our Metropolitan Planning Organization helped fund a lot of these projects. So what happens is we present a project to this organization, and then if it's found to be a project of merit, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or DSATs, will fund the project at a ratio of 80% federal to 20% local. So this is a vehicle that allows us to leverage our funding and really get the most out of the money. So when we try to do the reconstruction streets, those ones that are going to cost a lot more, it's advantageous for us to use our MFT money to leverage these extra dollars and have the federal government help pay for the reconstruct and that added cost. So the third reason I came up with for why there's some discrepancy is just because of the way the model's algorithm functions. The algorithm inherently has that curve in it that we were talking about earlier, and it recognizes that it's going to be more cost effective to maintain those streets that are in the yellow category than it is to attack those ones in the red. So by attacking maybe more streets in the yellow category, it's going to bring that average up quicker than it would be if we're doing a shorter segment of a reconstruction. Now, this is just an example of showing what happens if we do nothing for the next 5 years in the non-TIF streets. So the pavement index starts at a 78 and it would fall to a 68. You can see that if you take a look at the pie graphs here, the thing that jumps out to me is the change in the critical category, or the red category, is almost 5 times greater now in critical streets. What that kind of indicates is that maybe some of those streets that are in yellow are at the lower end of yellow and they're starting to fail. And if we wait 5 years, they're going to create a bigger problem. So if we start attacking those streets in the lower end of the yellow category and bring them back up to the green, we're going to buy ourselves some time and be able to continue to bring the network back up to an acceptable or a pavement index of 78.
John,
Yes.
as you think about this, from a cost perspective, and you look at the total cost projection,
Tom, could you use the microphone, please?
as you look at that and you think about the cost projection of the system, of what it would take to, say, stay at 78 versus the 68, that level that you indicated earlier, the 45 million, is the system capable of costing that out? In other words, what's the return on investment of spending 45 million relative to the total value? If we don't do that and you get 35%, the cost went up 4 times, then the 45 becomes 90?
Okay,
That's my
so,
question.
so you're saying if we do nothing now, what is that impact and how much will it cost then to
Yeah,
get a
and that-
68 up to a 78?
And that would be one way to get a return on investment type thought.
I don't know that answer.
Okay, is the system capable of providing that cost?
I believe we can.
Is the chart from the system?
The chart is based on the data that we pulled from the model.
From the system, so it deteriorates 5 years forward if you do nothing, therefore, you know the conditions 5 years forward, the system anticipates what that'll be. That's how you get the budget.
I'm not sure I follow you. So,
The system's projecting the deterioration 5 years forward if we do
yes,
nothing.
that's correct.
So in there, it's showing the deterioration, therefore.
Correct.
It has cost factors for each of those conditions. My
In that
question-
year, yeah.
Yeah, my question would be, could you get a return on investment type thing and saying, okay, that right chart is now gonna cost 90 million? Or whatever.
How much that chart, yeah, there is a way we could, basically we would consider the scenario on the right at 68 as the base scenario, and then say the condition deteriorates to this level, how much now does it take to get back
Exactly.
to 78?
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in? This is the point I was trying to make, is if the road's already failed or about to fail, that brings back the argument that we've debated many times in the past of just take off 4, 5, 6 inches, whatever you're gonna replace it with in concrete. I imagine it's 6 or 7. What would you put in? 8?
To replace a concrete road with asphalt?
Well,
or-
see, the problem is, and I understand this, I'll try to explain it and you help me out.
Okay.
Maybe there's a 12-inch base of gravel and maybe 4 inches of blacktop or 6 inches of blacktop, But if you have to reconstruct and you're going to take out all the gravel and dig it down and put in some bigger stone and then gravel and then put your blacktop in, you might get away with just taking down 6 or 8 inches and still have enough of a base that you can just put the concrete on and it's perfect.
That could be the case, and that's always when we do the reconstruct, we would look at it that way. And in the past, I've done alternate bids, so I'd see which one would come in more cost effective. But it's also, you have to consider the entire lifespan. So if we get a bid from the asphalt pavement saying that it's going to cost $1 million to do this road at an equivalent design to the concrete, we have to make sure then that lifespan is the same too. So we're comparing apples to apples. There is that opportunity to replace that street in concrete at the time. If it's more cost effective, that's certainly something I would recommend doing.
Well, the concrete might be theoretically a little bit more, but in the case of what you just described, it might be close. But even if it's a little bit more and you get double the life or something, some number, I don't know the numbers, that's where we never were willing in the past to get creative and bond for it. We just looked at what's it going to cost this year. And it just happened so many times that we just went blacktop.
Sure.
And it would have made more sense to do concrete had we been willing to bond it out for 10 years instead of just looking at what does it cost this year. And I've said enough. Thanks.
Okay. So this was the do nothing in a non-TIF scenario. The next pie chart just shows you what happens if you do nothing in the TIF scenario. And it's a very similar result. The streets that were in satisfactory condition deteriorate into the yellow category, and similarly, the yellow category deteriorates into the red or failing condition. So at this point in the presentation, I'm going to kind of give you an idea. I guess this is kind of what I'm going to call Street Maintenance 101. So I'm going to give you an idea of what the streets look like and what pavement indexes they correspond to. And for some of you who aren't familiar with the roads in general, I'm going to pass around some cores here of what roads actually look like and kind of explain them. So I'm going to start here, and you can start passing them around. I'm going to send one, Gene, your way, and we'll save this one for later. Oh, we'll just pass them all. So as you're looking at this core, what you'll see is on this one here, the top part of this core, this is actually the full depth of Taylor Street just before the bridge. So this is all asphalt material. This part just happened to pop off, but it's the surface. So what it looks like is at each line, yellow line here, is a different lift of asphalt. So this lift is surface material, the next is surface, the next is surface, and the next is what they call binder. Below the binder, you're going to have aggregate or stone, and beneath that will be the clay base on which it rests. Now, the ones that I'm passing around in that direction are the exact same format. There's going to be some yellow lines on there delineating the binder from the surface. And the one that Alderman Jacobson's holding in his right hand right now is a little unique because you're going to see that there's a thin black line in between the two layers. It's very defined. And that's actually the pavement fabric that was put down to prevent cracks from reflecting through the asphalt. So that's visible in that core. And that, if you're not familiar with the construction projects, the purpose of that is to prevent, like I said, the cracks from reflecting through to the surface. So it works in certain cases, in other cases it doesn't. So when you have enough surface material to place over that fabric, it's going to help you out. In situations when there's not enough surface over that fabric, a very good example of what happens is on Annie Glidden Road. If you ride Annie Glidden Road just north of, let's say north of Stadium Drive, and you continue on up past the village, the exterior lanes are starting to ravel more so than the interior lanes. And that's because when the street was milled and overlaid, there wasn't enough surface material to hold that fabric down. And so potholes start appearing more frequently in the outer lanes. So this is kind of, then moving on to these pictures, I'm going to kind of explain what happens over time in the cracks and the deterioration process of pavement. And I had a department head meeting today with the Public Works Department, And this kind of seemed to go over well with them, so I'm going to kind of do another hands-on demonstration of exactly what I'm talking about. In order to explain better about pavement maintenance, I asked somebody close to me to make Rice Krispie treats, because Rice Krispie treats are very similar to pavement surface. So I'm going to ask you to take a napkin, pass them around. I may or may not have enough of them to go around. I'd encourage the public works guys with the big appetites to take it easy, please. So as we're passing those around, what I want you to think about is there's several components to a Rice Krispie treat. There's several components that are very similar to asphalt. There's three things you're looking at when you look at asphalt. You're looking at asphalt binder, which is liquid. You're looking at the solids, which is the rock. And you're looking at air. You're looking at nothing. And the same three components exist in Rice Krispie treats. So you have your Rice Krispies, you have your marshmallow, and you have air, your voids. So what I want to point out with the Rice Krispie treats is that when you have Rice Krispie treats, and they're fresh like they are today, they're very tasty and very flexible. However, if you let that same Rice Krispie treat sit out on your counter for a day or two, it becomes very brittle and hard. And that's an example of exactly what happens with the asphalt. Over time, that asphalt becomes harder and it becomes brittle. And that leads to a lot of the cracking in the asphalt surfaces. So this is Black Hawk Road. This is on the way to Fanatico. As you look at this picture, there's going to be this is one of our higher rated streets. There are very hairline thin cracks that are starting to appear at the center line of the road. This is an example of a street that there are certain techniques that we could use on this street right away to really prolong the life. A couple of those are a slurry seal that would kind of seal those cracks and prevent water from getting in and making the cracks in the surface worse. We can crack fill those cracks, and at that point, that's kind of the prescribed maintenance for a street that's at a level of a 97. A typical street at a condition of 91 is in Devonair Farm subdivision. This is Horizon Lane. You'll see along the edge that edge cracks are starting to form. Now the cracks that are forming, I should back up and say there's three main distresses in flexible pavement or bituminous asphalt or asphalt streets. Those are fatigue cracking, thermal cracking, and rutting. This is an example of fatigue cracking right here, and it's a result of load or stress on the curb. You can see this a lot as a result of garbage trucks running along that curb and picking up trash and fracturing off that edge a little bit. Thermal cracks are unique and detrimental, and unfortunately they occur in our climate because of all the freeze and thaw we have beneath our pavement. So those lower temperatures are really going to damage the streets. When it thaws, it becomes more flexible, affects the base, and you're really going to start seeing the pavement deteriorate. Rutting is simply a dip in the roadway where the vehicles travel. So where you're driving down the road and the wheel path occurs, you're going to see a dip. And as we get further on in the slides, you'll see what I'm talking about with respect to that. So this is a street that has a pavement index of 91. The next street as we go down to is Lewis Street. This begins to become an 80. So this is the lower end of satisfactory. You'll see that we have done some preventative maintenance in the past. There's crack filling material available or seen on the roadway, and in the background you'll see also that there's been some pavement patching as well. Varsity Boulevard is a 78. This is our average street. This is what you can expect to see on an average street in the city of DeKalb, and this is the index at which we're talking about trying to maintain. As you'll see up in the right-hand side, there's a little bit of a pothole forming. There is some cracking as well, but there's also some preventive maintenance that's occurred on the roadway in the form of crack filling. This is the first slide at pavement index 71 that begins to show you what rutting looks like. The cracks that look there's a series of cracks adjacent to each other are called alligator cracks because it looks like the back of an alligator's skin. These cracks generally form where the pavement has been driven over repetitively by cars, And in this situation, it's just forming in the foreground, and we could anticipate that this rutting is going to continue further on. Pavement index 59 shows that this is indeed what happens as the road deteriorates, that rutting occurs the length of the street. Additionally, in this particular street, you'll see that longitudinal crack that occurs in between the rutting. This is a crack that is a result of where the two lifts or the two lanes of asphalt meet. When they initially pave them, this is a seam. The thermal cracking and the thermal movements or the thermal stresses are going to pull that seam away, and over time, water's going to infiltrate in it, get into the base, get to the point where it deteriorates the base, and then further regresses into a situation where it needs to be fully reconstructed. State Street, this is the candidate street we had the grant for. We have the grant for. This shows that there's some alligator cracking, there's some severe cracking in the longitudinal joint, and there's some transverse cracking just a little bit further beyond the pavement stripe. Pine Street, just over by I believe it's the Catholic Church on 3rd Street to 4th Street. There's a pavement index of 44. There's severe rutting in the street. There's edge cracking. And if you look off in the parkway, you'll see that there's 3 trees barely shown in the parkway. What can happen is a lot of the moisture that's retained on the leaves of the streets will drip down off of that after a rain and infiltrate into the rutting and the cracks in those areas and exacerbate the cracking situation. And this is one of the worst streets we have in town. It's Dietz Avenue, or State Street at Dietz Avenue, looking towards the General Electric building. And this basically embodies most of the different types of cracking within the realm of what's available out there, or the stresses that can possibly occur. So I'm going to point to Mark Espy at this point and ask him to give you a little background on the potholes and kind of the procedures that he has to go through from the maintenance side of things from the Public Works Department.
Thanks, John. 5-10 years ago, potholes were more of a seasonal issue. We had to contend with potholes January, February, March. After that, they kind of slid back down, and we really didn't have that much of an issue with it. And now, like Alderman Baker said, we're getting calls almost daily from our residents wanting us to come out and fill the potholes, which, when we get enough on a list, we will have to shut crews down because we don't have the latitude to just have anybody go fill them. I'll have to shut down. 2 weeks ago, we had the sign crew that was doing a public safety signing project around school zones. I had nobody to fill the potholes, so we shut the crew down. We go fill potholes for 3 days. Last week, I shut my forestry crew down. We do not have the staff to continually fill potholes like is needed to get caught back up. The price of patch mix has went up probably 60% in the last 5 years. It cost me $2,000 for a truckload of patch mix. We can shovel that truck in about 2 days' time, so you can only illustrate exactly how much we're talking about over the course of a whole year, with you put manpower and time and everything into it on how much we're actually spending on this. It frustrates me, it frustrates my staff. We go out and when the pavement service is compromised, you can fill the hole, and then within about a week or two, if the right conditions occur, the hole will start migrating and surface right next to it. So you're chasing your tail, you're going round and around and around. And the state the other day, when they did their presentation here, they said that the state was on a cliff. And I kind of related to that when the phone calls come into the street department, I feel like we're the front of that cliff. And I'm just asking that we do something, because in the next couple of 3 years, like John illustrated, I'm very afraid of what the streets are going to look like in DeKalb.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.
We kind of briefly touched on this maintenance curve. What this curve is demonstrating is it shows the relationship between the quality of street and time. So again, kind of just reemphasizing the point that needs to be made is we really need to address pavement maintenance at the point where the green curve transitions into red. It's more cost effective to do it at that point and then extend that curve out again and prolong the need for maintenance in the future. So I'd like to present a bit of a funding comparison just between DeKalb and our neighbors. Based on the amount of money that we have allocated for this budget year, which is $350,000 for our street maintenance program, that's roughly about $7.94 that we're spending on a person in DeKalb per road. In contrast, Sycamore had just passed a program for $1.78 million, which translates to about $101 per person. This is not the end of their road project. They are still going to be letting yet another contract for $250,000, putting their program roughly at about $2 million. We do have funding options, and those are the scenarios that have been included in the background of this presentation, or in the memo. To maintain the infrastructure, again, to reiterate, at the same pavement condition or level of service that we have, which is a 78 right now, the study indicates that it's going to be about $45 million over 5 years, which is about $9 million a year. If we take a look at the options available to us, or I should say the scenarios that I ran, the first option looks at $9 million, and then they transition down to nothing. You can see the impact that each scenario has. $9 million keeps the pavement rating exactly where it is right now. At $350,000, which what we're proposing, if we do that each of the 5 years, we're going to have the pavement rating down to about a 68. What I'm going to do is now I have each of those scenarios, what they look like on the screen. However, I'm also going to flip through them on the boards here and then set them aside so you can take a look at them at break time or whenever you have an opportunity. So really, going through these scenarios, it's visually apparent, running down from $9 million to nothing, the difference in streets that you can maintain over that amount of time. So with that, that's the conclusion of the presentation, and I'd like to entertain any comments or questions you might have at this time regarding that presentation. Yes?
So if the $45 million was invested, would $350,000 per year from that point even make it? Or what would that desirable annual hardline figure be so that we can, plan in a long-term fashion?
That would be a scenario that I should take a look at. I would run that scenario. I don't have that answer for you today, but if I run the scenario again at 78 where it is and run it, we can find out exactly how much money that would cost us and kind of force a projected 10-year view of the situation.
Great, thank you.
Yes?
John, if you could go back to the slide with the dollar amount. That one.
Oops, yes.
Okay, so one way to read that is the $350,000 that we're investing right now does nothing.
Yes.
So we're actually throwing the $350,000 away because we're gonna end up in the same place in 5 years if we didn't spend the money.
That's correct.
Okay.
But it may be a more palatable decline, because the 350,000 would be going into some
We do some
road
form of
service.
patching of the roads over time.
But you're right, Mike, the end result,
Oh, yeah, the end result would be the same
yeah,
level, yeah.
there was a question.
Yes.
At what level does a street become unsafe, or it's closed, or?
Sure. I think that becomes into the realm of the pavement index when it's 59 and below. So if we're looking at that red area, probably the lower end of that red area is when we're going to start closing roads. I don't think we have any roads right now that are in that condition where they need to be closed. They just need a whole lot of attention. And those are the streets that are giving Mark the biggest amount of trouble because he doesn't want to close the roads. We don't want to close the roads. So
Well,
he's out there
yeah.
patching them to make sure that we get that minimum level of effort in there in order to maintain passable roads.
John, could you go
Because
back to the
nothing's
pie chart,
provided.
TIF and non-TIF pie charts?
Sure.
In our current scenario.
5 years of duration.
Yes.
Yeah, it's, I mean, we budgeted what we budgeted. We're not
Oh, non-TIF
assuming
tip.
any movement.
Which kind of leads to
So
this.
that's the TIF.
Okay.
Correct.
So it's not materially better than.
Thank you.
I can't read that one. But the TIF index today is not it's somewhat better than the overall, but it really isn't that much better. The cost avoidance there would be interesting to note, but it looks like the ratio of cost avoidance is not quite as bad as the overall, but it's still material. So from an investment standpoint and a return on investment, trying to address some of those dollars. I know in the past, there's been TIF dollars allocated to roads, and I think in the budget it had been, I think, $1 million a year thereabouts, which had some impact, hopefully. Other than that, out of our existing dollars, as was mentioned, the MFT fund, probably over half of the MFT fund is going to other than roads. And of the MFT fund balance, which is like $2 million, apparently most of that money is allocated to liabilities that were established with other road projects in the past.
Some of it is, and some of the future money that we have, some of the future MFT funds are going to be reserved for those projects I mentioned with the MPO. So those funds could be used to leverage federal funding to get a bigger bang.
How far out does the MPO go? How many years do they plan?
They plan 5 for a tip, but they also go beyond. So the only thing they can fund is up to 5 years, but the projects can be scheduled as long as.
Are we in line for any grants on a 5-year forward basis? Are we in line for
Yes.
some of that?
In fiscal year 17, we have a project in line, but it's for a coordinated traffic signal update program. So it doesn't have anything to do with pavement, but it is traffic signals. And in fiscal year 19, we have the Bethany Road, or I'm sorry, Peace Road widening project, which will, depending on how it goes, it's either going to widen the Peace Road from the intersection of 38 south some distance, or it's going to go from 88 north some distance.
Okay, thank you. So nothing that affects this?
Yeah, the Peace Road would not affect the TIF district.
Okay.
Yes.
Are the roads significantly impacted negatively when it's a really bad winter? In other words, not this past winter, but the one before, did we take a real hit because that was so bad?
I think I defer to Mark to kind of maybe give you some anecdotal observations on that one, because he is out on the roads with his guys more frequently. What I would start out with saying is maybe it's not necessarily how cold the winter is, because Wisconsin doesn't necessarily have this problem that we do. What it is the freeze and thaw. So when we're hanging around 32 degrees and we warm up to 40 for a week or two, and then we crash back down to 20, that continual expansion of the ice within the pavement, expanding and contracting, creates a bigger stress on the pavement than it would in a place where it stays cold until, mid-March, and then it warms up, and that's going to be how warm it is.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Last winter was an average winter for potholes. The winter prior to that, it was absolutely havoc. The pavement, if you think about a piece of wire, you can bend it back and forth so many times, and then it breaks. And that's what happened 2 years ago. We were out on weekends at times. And it's my fear that if we have another couple of bad winters in a row, it's going to escalate that red portion of the pie chart faster than what is even illustrated in the scenario.
Okay.
Yes.
Chair Peddle.
John, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical. I want you to do the best
Okay.
you can with that. If I'm remembering your presentation correctly, the kind of like the second level of deterioration that you showed was that side cracking, the cracking toward the curbs. And you noted that one of the causes of that is heavy traffic, or traffic with heavier loads, bigger trucks. Okay. Okay, now, nobody panic in the room or outside the room. If we did not have our waste management trucks going down those streets on a weekly basis multiple trucks, heavy, okay? Do you have any guess as to whether there would be a noticeable, I won't use significant, but a noticeable change in the, either the length of the pavement viability or an improvement in the pavement index? Is that
Yeah.
reasonable?
That's a reasonable statement. Anytime you add that heavier load that the pavement wasn't necessarily, I'm not gonna say it wasn't designed for, but isn't necessarily used to accommodating, there's gonna be a noticeable difference that you're gonna see.
So I would suggest for a later discussion that it is possible that our garbage fees are not covering the full cost of providing that service if there's a road component that certainly is not in what we're charging the individual consumer. So that may be something that we want to talk about with respect to tying revenue generation to what is causing the particular issue, but that's just an idea.
Okay. John, thank you for the presentation this evening. One more question, Alderman Baker.
John, I know for sure that some of our local choices, like Kern, for instance, they're booked for this year. If you asked them to do anything, they'd tell you next year on these big projects. What are we planning on bidding all this stuff for next spring now? And if that were the case, which I know there's a significant discount when you put the contracts out for first thing out of the spring, because the fall contracts, they're possibly up against overtime and working 24 hours just to meet their contract. So they build that price in. Can't we just go ahead and take all the TIF areas and go concrete and bond them out, or do whatever we have to while we still have some TIF left and just concentrate on that right now? Has that scenario been looked at?
I haven't.
Because-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just concerned that we've already missed our opportunity to do any real resurfacing. Sure, we can probably even keep it in-house, or I don't know what we would do as far as the crack filling and the patching. Maybe we need a new patch machine. I don't know exactly what you can do to maintain where we're at in calendar year 15, but it seems to me that the concrete companies and the big excavating companies could handle the reconstruction of the TIF area and concrete, where maybe the blacktop companies are all booked up. I'm just wondering if that is looked at yet.
We haven't looked at that. I think that could be an alternative we can look at in the future. Right now, with the money we do have, that $350,000, it's going to be enough to do probably a patching program, and that's about it. So in the next calendar year or fiscal year, what we'd kind of be looking for is to bid that contract as early as possible and make sure that Curran and all the other paving contractors are available. For my conversations with our consultants that we interviewed for the water main project, we've been finding out that companies like Curran and Peter Baker do have big tollway contracts for this year. And that was
Right.
kind of reflected in the prices we saw for the water main, because when the tollway authority starts picking those contractors up, there's less contractors available for the locals to utilize. So as a result, our costs increase. Hopefully, their contract expires or they complete it in this fiscal year, and next fiscal year, they're going to be chomping at the bit and ready to get on some of the local projects, and we'll get competitive prices with them.
Well, I have another question. I'm not sure, this one maybe have to be directed to the city manager, but I know that when we passed the gasoline tax, the per gallon tax, I'm thinking that's the 350. Where's the 500,000 that we were adding to? Why aren't we spending 850? I mean, what are the numbers? I'm confused that it's down to 350, because I don't want this to be like the lottery that was supposed to go to education, and then all the funding was taken away and the lottery kind of replaced. We were supposed to be putting more money this direction, and I don't know what's happened.
I can tell you the local motor fuel tax, the 2 cents that is dedicated to the capital fund, has trended down slightly. It was about $384,000 in fiscal 2012, $372 in fiscal 2013, dropping down to $369, and in 2015, we're projecting it to be about $360,000, and that's where the $350 is coming from.
But is that all we're spending? Where's the 500 we were spending before we passed that tax to add on to it? That was MFT money.
There were some state grants that went through this fund also. There is some MFT money that we have every year. It's about $300,000 as well for just maintenance.
Yeah, so there is some money allocated for maintenance. I think last year, I'm not sure how much money we spent out of MFT for maintenance, but we've been budgeting that money for the future widening project that's planning to occur in 2019. So we're trying to keep some of that money there so that we can leverage those funds from the federal government. So I think the project cost may have been, I'm going to mess up the numbers. I think it's, I can tell you.
While you're looking that up, it's 3.5 cents, not 2 cents. Where's the other 1.5 going?
The other 1.5 is dedicated to pay the debt off for the public safety building.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't like that idea at the time. Yeah, I was the other vote against the way they did that. I remember what happened. But I wanted to go to 5 cents, not 3.5, and I wanted it all for roads. Okay.
So kind of what I've been budgeting for was the Peace Road widening from I-88 to Macomb. What we have is $430,000 budgeted for MFT for that in fiscal year 18 and 19, and that's based on a total contract cost of $1.4 million. The total figure that we're budgeting for then for the realignment of Route 38 and Peace Road and the subsequent additional widening of Peace so that we'd have a continually wide road from 88 all the way to 38 would be a $4.5 million project, and that doesn't have any supporting funds at this time right now. It's solely based on MFT. That project could be a candidate project for the MPO in the future. Yes?
Just a question, everything going through MPO, is it really for growth and new, or if you said $80 to $20 million for reconstruction as a project number, would that be considered, could be considered separately for grant?
So the way the MPO works is it consists of the town of Cortland, the city of Sycamore, DeKalb County, and city of DeKalb. These four entities present projects to the MPO for consideration, and the projects are supposed to have a regional impact. That's primarily the goal of them. So because these groups are together, it should be a project that benefits all of the communities.
Okay. So there's no way to go direct for a grant outside? In other words, I don't know if MPO is the
Sure.
right way, or is there alternatives that we haven't looked
I'm not aware of any other federal grants available to local agencies other than those that have been, now I believe the appropriate term is appropriated to them.
Okay. Other questions at this point? We have a number of topics yet to cover. I'd like to thank you, John, for the presentation on streets. Alderwoman O'Leary.
So, okay, the funds that are set aside, you said for the motor fuel tax, you said you're saving it for 2018 and 2019?
I'm saving for what would be fiscal year 17 and fiscal year 20. So a little bit further out.
Okay,
Kathy, do those show up in the fund balance at the end of each year?
Yeah, I think John's intention is to try to correct me if I'm wrong, is to try to grow this fund balance so that we have the 20% to dedicate to those projects.
That's correct. So,
So is that clear, Monica? The funds are accumulating in the fund balance.
Okay, so, all right, so while they're accumulating, we can't do patchwork or no other work because we're trying to save it for 2017 and 2020?
2020. Part of those funds have been reserved for those specific projects, so they're not being used to patch the roads. And the advantage of, the reason we're doing that is because say we have a $1 million project, the share that the city would be paying would only be $200,000. And the federal government would be paying that other $800,000, as opposed to, we could use that money to patch for the next 5 years, but then we don't have that money to use to do that big project, so we'd be missing out on $800,000.
Okay, so while we're putting this money aside, are we putting in some kind of investment fund to double it, or?
I don't know that the state allows that, but I defer to Kathy on that.
We do earn interest on MFT money, but, interest rates are very low, so we're not doubling our money by any means, so.
Okay. Can we move on then to other topics? Thank you, John. I'd like to introduce the next topic, and some of my introductory comments are going to pertain to the overall look that is being taken and is in front of us in terms of the fiscal 16 budget. Mark Espy referred to IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation Secretary Blankenhorn's presentation on Monday of this week. He hosted a listening tour in DeKalb, at which he emphasized, as a state, we're at a cliff. We need to, in the future, pay as we go and have regular flow of revenue anticipated for our maintenance programs. For state roads and infrastructure, we need sustainable and equitable revenue streams. Fleet, streets, and water presentations that we've heard over these past several budget hearings emphasize that we need to pay as we go to maintain a quality of life in the city of DeKalb. The other comment I'd like to refer to are characteristics of creative thinking and innovation, something that this city council has put in front of our current city manager. Creative thinking and innovation characteristics include challenge limiting and erroneous assumptions that block creative possibilities. They establish healthy, productive ways of thinking about risk-taking, ear and failure, listening skills. They use radical questioning techniques to launch into fresh, creative realms. The alternative tax revenues we're going to hear next are really just proposals. We have charged Anne Marie with looking at what will put us in a financially sustainable position as a community. And therefore, she has been charged with coming up with alternative scenarios for us to consider. And I'd like to offer that these are merely proposals. They're in front of us for our consideration. And with that, I'd like to turn to Anne Marie for the alternative revenue sources discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to ask Kathy Haley, our Finance Director, to kind of give an overview of it, and we'd be happy after we go through the presentation to answer any questions. But just to stress and highlight what the Mayor just said, these are options. There may be options that you either find palatable or not palatable, and it's to start a discussion and then see where it goes. And just to build on the people in the audience today and those watching at home had the benefit of seeing the presentation on streets. And I encourage you, if you haven't seen the presentation on fleet and equipment, to take a look at that, because streets is just one part of the challenge that we're facing as far as capital funding. Another significant part is fleets. So with that, I'll turn it over to Director Haley.
So I'll recap very briefly on what was discussed Saturday regarding capital assets, fleet, and equipment. You'll hear me talk best practices. This is our theme for this budget: best practices for budgeting, best practices for capital asset planning. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends that local governments establish a system for assessing their assets and then appropriately plan and budget for any capital maintenance and replacement needs. On Saturday, we discussed fleet and equipment along with capital projects not including streets. We showed a 5-year projection for capital projects without streets and just doing the small maintenance projects that we do. We would be almost $6 million in the red with the current dedicated revenue stream that we have going to that fund. For capital equipment and fleet, we also showed a 5-year projection on that. The combination of those two puts us almost over $10 million in the red if we weren't to do some more planning or dedicate some more revenue to any of those funds as well. Looking at alternative revenue sources to dedicate to this objective of building a true capital equipment replacement program and funding a true 5-year capital improvement plan, I think is important to the future of the city of DeKalb. You also have a 5-year projection from the general fund. This planning is also important to sustain the general fund. You can see that at the end of that 5 years, the current model of the general fund isn't sustainable based on current revenue streams and current expenditures. However, we are presenting a balanced budget for fiscal 16. So best practices, again, with general fund revenue streams flat and the diminishing revenue dollars the general fund is receiving from the TIF funds over time, the ability of the general fund to fund a portion of capital assets is severely diminished. Therefore, creating a new revenue source dedicated to long-term fiscal stability of the city is sound financial practice. So with that, I just want to go through, again, these are some options that we've done some research on. They're meant to spark discussion. To maybe bring up other options, bring up other recommendations, or just to hear thoughts on the 3 that we have in front of you. So the first option we looked at was the home rule sales tax. Currently, the city's home rule sales tax is at 1.75%. The city receives 1% from the state, as all local municipalities do, and being home rule, we've added an additional 1.75%. Thoughts to increasing that, it can be increased by 25% increments according to the Illinois Department of Revenue. So I kind of ran a couple scenarios. An increase of 0.5% could potentially generate an additional revenue to the city of $2 million. An increase of 1% could add about $4 million of additional revenue to the city. Keeping in mind, sales tax does fluctuate depending on the economy, but I gave some sample sales tax rate, both the total sales tax rates and then just the home rule sales tax rates of some comparable communities. You can see the total sales tax rate ranges from 9.5% down to 6.25%, and then the home rule rate also varies. Keeping in mind that some of these communities have other, they collect percentage for the RTA, and county may collect something different, so that may factor into some of the rates. But to have the total rate and the home rule rate compared on there, I thought was a good idea. There's also a link on here that gives you every community, I think, throughout the state and their rates. I explained a little bit about the home rule sales tax rate. Being home rule community, there's no voter approval that's required. An ordinance would be required, and it would need to be filed with the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue takes these ordinances twice a year. If it was filed by October 1, the rate would be effective for January 1. If we filed it by April 1 of any given year, it would be effective for July 1. Any questions? on
Just
this?
before you go on to the next item, just for the sake of the audience, if the council and the committee were to consider a sales tax increase now or in the future, keep in mind that this is not borne solely by the residents of DeKalb, that you would have not only those that would be shopping in the city, whether it's Sycamore residents, Cortland, you name it, but students as well. So it's not borne primarily just by the residents of DeKalb.
We did have
I'm going to jump in. You're not showing us that DeKalb is really already at 10% for most of what we go out on a daily basis and spend in the restaurants and the bars. And I mean, we're not, this doesn't take into account what really needs to be compared. I mean, if you're going to show us this, then you need to show us what all the surrounding communities are for their restaurant tax as well.
I can look up restaurant and bar taxes across these communities as well, and add that.
you're gonna find, I agree that you should have those numbers in front of you, but you're gonna find that they're almost, DeKalb is gonna fall almost exactly in the same place. You know, I watch that when I eat in other communities. Some are as high as 14%, others are at 11.5%, but the general rule of 2% on top of your sales tax is pretty much holds true. So it would be good to have those numbers in front of us, but I think you're gonna find that DeKalb is gonna come out very, very similarly.
What is Sycamore? I see,
10.
so they've raised theirs up to match us finally. Okay,
They have for the last several years been at 10.
okay.
That was actually, there was a very, very, very short period of time, a matter of a few months, that they were at 9.5 when we went to 10. But they've been at 10 within months of when we went to 10.
So Kathy, you'll add a sampling of
Yep.
restaurant bar tax to this table?
Yep.
Thank you.
I agree, I have seen the 14, but I'm not going to be one of those that would vote to raise, but I do want to see the comparison, so I'm
Let's
educated
deal
and
with
can think
facts.
about it.
I think
Thank you.
dealing with facts
Absolutely.
is the best
Yeah.
policy.
Good.
And I think this is the beginning of, nothing needs to be decided tonight. So this is kind of just to start discussions and make a decision down the road. Okay, so the next topic and option is amusement tax. I'm showing an option of 4%. It doesn't have to be 4%. It could be 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%. I'm using the model from Bloomington. I spoke with the finance director down there on this tax. The uniqueness of this particular tax is what she found was they were able to also tax cable television subscriptions, and that's what sparked Bloomington to look into this further. So amusement tax has been around for a long time, but I think the cable television subscription portion is fairly new and unique, so.
Kathy, does that include satellite or is it only cable?
I'm not sure. I can find out.
Yeah, I think.
It's a really complex ordinance and tax. The City of Chicago's ordinance is 44 pages long, so you can really do a lot with this tax and just do certain, there's a lot of exemptions you could make from it. It's very complex.
And a lot of I'm sorry, Dave.
Go ahead, and then I'll jump in.
Sure, Pavel.
There are a lot of communities that apply, they define their tax base, and then instead of applying a percentage, they apply a fixed fee, $1 a ticket, or things like that.
Alderman Baker?
This is something that's come up, gosh, no less than 10 times out of the 14 years I've been here, and I would not be interested in taxing bowling, golf, gym membership, sports programs, or park and recreation programs. That would be absolutely no way. But I even had a meeting with the people at the Convocation Center and tried to get the numbers on just exactly how many tickets and how many in an event. Was it 7,000 average, 4,000? We were always told we couldn't tax the events there, which we'd get our money presumably direct from Ticketmaster, and we know we're getting the right amounts without also going after the movie tickets. You mentioned something that's caught my attention. Can we pick and choose from that exhibitive entertainment and maybe just get the Convocation Center money?
When I spoke with the finance director in Bloomington, they did exempt certain organizations or events. I don't know what the parameters are to that, if it's specific, but I can certainly find out more detail if that's the direction you want to start to look at.
Absolutely. We'd like to, we're not even sure we're getting our sales tax out of the Convocation Center. They wouldn't answer that question when John Gordon was questioned directly by me as the alderman, and especially in a special sanctioned meeting that the council approved of.
I would jump in, and I know Director Haley has been working with NIU staff, and I feel very confident, based on the information we have, that we have the data from NIU and that sales tax is being collected at the Convocation Center as well as other entities throughout the university. So I know Director Haley has had multiple meetings with NIU staff. The other thing I would point out, you know, the purpose of tonight's discussion is to get a feel if there's any interest or questions that you have. I would want to state that any type of tax or fee that would be considered in relation to NIU, we'd want to have a follow-up discussion with NIU, and we have not done that at this point because this is very early in the stages. We would want to understand if any type of financial impact it would have on them. We know the precarious situation NIU is in right now with what's going on at the state budget, as well as the city with, you know, the concern over the LGDF reduction. So I just want to emphasize that we wouldn't do anything without sitting down with NIU to fully understand any financial impact, and we would not, as staff, be recommending anything that would have an adverse impact on the university.
Thank you. Chair Petal.
Couple of points. Number one, I agree with Alderman Baker that the political palatability of exhibitive entertainment is much higher than that for participative entertainment. One comment is I think the state is probably going to extend the sales tax to services, and they're going to pick up participative entertainment probably in that process. The second thing is that when you're talking about an entity like a university, you also have to deal with the same situation that Chicago had to deal with the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority, and that is, for example, you might ask Bloomington, how do they deal with tickets that are included in student fees, et cetera. I don't know if you have followed the issue in Chicago with respect to the White Sox ticket promotion, but they had a promotion where they sold a pass for the April and May games, and the average price per game was below $3 per game. And there was an exemption in the Illinois Sports Finance Authority agreement that if a ticket was given away or sold for less than $3, then it was not taxed by the Illinois Sports Finance Authority. So there's a lot of crafting that has to come together if you choose that this is a route that you want to pursue.
Kathy?
Finally, the third option that we have brought forward tonight is the gas utility tax, increasing that from 4 cents per therm to 5 cents per therm. There is no maximum limit on this, so it could go up more than that. I did not find many places that had anything higher than 5 cents per therm, and that would be about an additional $220,000 in revenue.
Kathy, I think it's really important I believe it's gas that was the issue in the past, that we really understand what the tax base is on the gas utility tax, because as I recall, that tax is pretty easy for a large user to avoid. And so we have to understand when you pay the tax and when you don't. I believe that the tax is on the producer rather than the delivery. And so we just need to know what our tax is taxing. Who is the entity that is legally responsible for paying the tax? And then who does that tax get passed on to as a consumer? Because my understanding is it's not necessarily intuitive.
There's two types of gas utility tax. One does affect the producer, and the one is the delivery. I think ours is 5 cents per therm on the end user. But I will double check.
Please.
Okay, other questions or discussion? Alderperson Noriko.
Historically, and, you know, obviously I'll defer to the other council members and whatever historical memory staff, you know, might have. But historically, what proposed tax increases have been most palatable to the citizens? Well, yeah, and I was going to amend my statement and say, realizing nobody likes higher taxes, but, you know, if you gave people, you know, several options, or several options had been discussed, what did you get the least pushback on?
Motor fuel tax.
Chair
Let me
Petal.
answer in general, because I've had this comment from some citizens prior to tonight's meetings. And please, anybody that disagrees or has more insight, please speak up and interrupt me. In general, you will find that revenue sources where the public can transparently see where their tax dollars are going and where they are devoted are going to be more palatable than those that are not. We've talked a lot tonight and in previous meetings about streets, about a fleet maintenance program, and about the water system, okay? And one of the things that Alderman Baker has said many, many times, both this year and in previous years, is what about the future? What about when you have a different council? So, you know, the bottom line is, to the extent that you can dedicate a revenue source to a particular purpose, but do it in such a way that it really is binding, as opposed to just being a promise that can be broken. Those tend to be a little bit more palatable. And one of the interesting things about Illinois law is the fact that non-home rule municipalities can pass with referendum approval things like a public safety tax and senior citizen tax. There are a few things, and that's why you'll see some of the non-home rule jurisdictions have higher sales taxes. Those, by law, are rigid in terms of what those funds can be used for. A home rule jurisdiction cannot do that. They can only make a promise that those funds will be segregated, and that promise is only as good as the next ordinance that you pass.
Alderman Baker.
To follow a note on that, I wanted a vehicle sticker to be renewable every year, like many of the suburbs. Chicago, I think, is $120 the last time I checked. We are zero, and there were about 27,000 cars in the community, and at $30 to $40 or $35, that would have raised $600,000 or $800,000, which I thought should have been what funded the police station. And I lost that argument because, and it was reminded earlier, the part of what funding that public safety building is that motor fuel tax, but the rest of it is going to where it really should go. And that fits in line with exactly what you're talking about. I got only pushback from the gasoline station owners on the sales tax increase for the, or excuse me, the per gallon tax.
Well, and we don't need to argue the merits of the vehicle sticker program, but the point that you're making is, yeah, I appreciate the agreement.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to point out, to emphasize what Chair Petal said earlier and Director Haley. As staff, we are not recommending that the committee or the council take any action tonight in regards to either the streets or the fleet and the equipment side of the equation. when we get it to the wrap-up part, we are gonna revisit the water fund and see if you want to head into any particular direction. The consultants have come back with the 1A scenario. But to go back what Chair Petal said a few minutes ago, is I think it would be premature to take any action until we see what happens in Springfield. Number one, we need to see what action that they take in regards to the budget, and number two, to see if there is any expansion of revenue, particularly on the sales tax, because if there is, that could ultimately impact different scenarios or different funding options of whether that's the general fund, whether that's capital, you name it. So just to be clear that we're not recommending taking any action on that side. If you do want to provide any direction on the water side tonight, that would be a possibility. If you want to delay that as well, that is your option as well.
And City Manager Gore, either you or Director Haley made the point that we are looking at an FY16 balanced budget. So these alternative revenue sources potentially could affect 16, but more relevant are the deficits we're seeing in 17, 18, and beyond.
Correct.
Did you indicate 16 is revenue neutral? Or did I misunderstand that?
We are not recommending any additional revenue sources
Okay.
in the fiscal year 16 budget, so the general fund is balanced. I think with the timing, when we get to the water fund, I would ask Director Haley to talk about just the timing of when water bills go out versus when increases have been seen in the past or when increases would be seen in the future. But any of the items we've talked about tonight, we have not wrapped any revenue assumptions into any of the budgets from the general fund to the capital funds.
Okay. Thank you. Other discussion or questions on this topic this evening? Hearing none, we'll move on.
Okay.
Unless, Kathy, you had anything further? Okay.
Nope.
We're to the TIF.
Sure, I will jump in there, and I'm going to ask our Economic Development Coordinator, Jennifer Diedrich, to give an overview and start the discussion on TIF, and then I'm sure at different points I'll probably jump in. But with that, I'll turn over to Coordinator Diedrich.
Thank you. This evening, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about our TIF phase-out plan in relation to the FY16 budget. The city currently has 2 TIF districts, the Central Area TIF District, which expires in 2020, and TIF number 2, which expires in 2018. The city manager recognized quickly after she started that, the planning for the phase-out of these 2 TIF districts needed to start sooner rather than later. And so last summer, a staff team was put together, which was made up of, obviously, the city manager, the assistant city manager, the finance director, the community development director, the city attorney, myself, the city engineer, our principal planner, and our TIF attorney, Kathleen Field Orr. When the group set out with developing this plan, they reviewed the history of TIF and what we spent TIF money on in the past, and what our existing plans called out for in reference to of projects. This group worked under the premise that the current TIF districts would not be extended any additional amount of time, and then any future TIF districts that would need to be created would be in a smaller targeted area. So we wouldn't see something similar to the Central Area TIF, which is the TIF in green on that map back there. TIF number 2 is the TIF in yellow. So that was the thought going forward, is that any future TIFs would be in a smaller targeted area versus a large area like they are now. We started planning with the idea of what would we do if money was no object. What kind of projects would we envision? We developed a list of projects and whittled them down in consideration of what effect they would have on the community, which projects would have the most transformative effect and make the biggest impact on the community. Those projects were then provided cost estimates. We tried to determine what the cost of those projects would be. And the list was then again further reduced by combining those projects of a common theme and putting them into areas of small, medium, and large cost categories. The result of this exercise, I'm sorry, before I go further. The projects were then bundled by region. So where in the community, within the TIF districts, are the largest concentration of these projects focused? And the results of which focused on the downtown area. Like I said earlier, the strategy in developing this list of projects was to focus on developments which would have the most transformative impact in the community, that would have a meaningful impact and would have a lasting impact. As we're getting to the point where we're about 5 years out, max, we need to, what's the most bang for our buck? What is our legacy of this TIF gonna be? At this point, we're just reviewing FY16 for a couple of reasons. This document is intended to be a fluid document. What you have seen in the past was a larger spreadsheet that went years out and projected revenues years out. We're not there yet. We have a lot of ideas that we need to do more due diligence on. We want to use FY16 as our time to do some planning and vetting a little bit more of these projects and try to figure out the feasibility of these. Realistically, are these things that we really could do, and are they needed? And so, if you go to the section in the backup, before I go on to the section that shows the project list, that shows the 7-year TIF phase-out, before I get into the details of the list, I should mention the America's Best Communities Grant. The City of DeKalb, as you know, received a $50,000 grant from Frontier Communications, as we were one of the quarterfinalists in the America's Best Communities competition. And so with that $50,000, what we have been asked to do by Frontier is to develop an economic development strategic plan. TIF is our primary funding source for economic development projects. So it only makes sense that whatever economic development initiatives come out of that economic development strategic plan, we would likely want to roll into this phase-out plan as well. And at this point, we just don't know what those all are. So once we've had the opportunity to do the economic development strategic plan, and then we've had the opportunity to vet out some of these ideas a little bit further, we'll come back to you with a more comprehensive plan, which we will then ask you to allocate dollars to specific projects. And the reason for doing that is a recommendation from our TIF attorney. She has advised that we do that so that if the project that we are allocating the monies to extends beyond the expiration period of the TIF district, we still have those monies available and we hold them in the TIF district fund to continue to pay that project out until it's finished.
Revenue steps for the assessment.
Yes, yes, yes. It's basically the TIF fund turns into an escrow account. So the property tax revenues are extended out to the taxing bodies as if the TIF district wasn't in effect any longer, but we hold on to the funds that we had already generated to pay out the completion of those projects. So on our draft 7-year phase-out plan, I tried to make it very simple. You're going to see that the two TIF districts have been combined for the purposes of revenues and expenditures. Obviously, revenues are what we anticipate receiving in FY16. Expenditures are the typical expenditures that you would see in any budget category or any budget fund. Freight and postage, legal expenses, marketing, dues and subscriptions, training and education. Those are all the typical contractual type items that you would see. But the real meat of this phase-out plan starts in the next section under TIF number 1. The first project that I think the whole staff group agreed on, hands down, was the option of adding air conditioning to the Egyptian Theater. This was for several reasons. We have the desire to make it a 12-month venue. Making this a 12-month venue would offset the students leaving the community over the summertime, and then you have a 12-month venue downtown that would generate foot traffic, that generates patrons to restaurants, they generate patrons to the retail stores. We've heard from several business owners downtown that when the Egyptian is busy, they are busy, so they walk hand in hand. So that's something that we feel is important to try to aspire to if that's possible. The second reason is that Over the past 20 years, the city of DeKalb has invested a significant amount of funding in the Egyptian Theater for capital projects to the tune of over $2 million. Having air conditioning in that building would help protect our investment. The theater, I don't know how many of you know this, the theater is one of 6 remaining Egyptian theaters in the United States and the only one east of the Mississippi River. So we definitely have a building that is very unique to our community, and we see value in preserving that.
And I'm going to jump in here at this point, just to build on what Jennifer Diedrich is saying. We have met and listened to the community. We have had 4 different meetings, most recently as yesterday with the Economic Development Committee. But as far as the community is concerned, we met with a group of business leaders. We also met with 2 groups at the chamber, one the Public Policy Committee and 2 the Downtown Merchants. One of the things I know I've heard in the time that I've been here, especially from the downtown businesses, of how important the Egyptian Theater is to the lifeblood of their business, and the difference they see in the nights that the Egyptian Theater is holding an event. If you look at the success of the expansion of the library, the adding air conditioning or funding air conditioning for the Egyptian Theater builds on the expansion of the library and creates more of a synergy in the downtown. I can speak on behalf of staff and what we've heard, and I hope some of the business come forward and speak over the next couple of weeks, that getting the Egyptian Theater open 365 days a year is absolutely critical to the future of the downtown.
Thank you. Next item in the list is something that, like I said, we've been funding for many years. It's building improvements, capital improvements to the Egyptian Theater. We would continue to do that for FY16. The structural commercial program, this idea was a direct result of the commercial building ordinance. As we move through that process, we recognize that there are several buildings in the community, many in the downtown, that have some severe structural deficits. And so the idea with this program is to provide a funding resource for property owners to help them with their buildings become more structurally sound so they're able to have a viable business operating out of that building.
I'm sorry, where did that fall under?
That was the structural commercial program.
8624. Yeah, 8624. It's the third line item under TIF 1.
Okay.
And would that include, I mean, one of the structural difficulties that a lot of the building owners face there is that the existing apartments upstairs or the former apartment spaces are no longer rentable because of building code or because of safety issues. Obviously, when you're looking at a rental and a landlord situation, because our downtown rental rates are so depressed in commercial, in the downstairs commercial, a lot of the building owners, we see a lot of turnover in sales downtown, especially in terms of the commercial not being able to support those buildings, not only in terms of paying the cost of being able to maintain them, being able to paint them, being able to structurally deal with them. Is that something we would look to focus on, is getting some of those issues in those upstairs areas functionable and viable to try to help the owners and the community pay for those buildings?
We haven't really gone into the details of what this program would look like. We just recognize at this point that there is a need. And so that is what we are using FY16 to do, is to try to develop those programs and those policies to help do that. I would say if there were structural repairs, if that is what's holding them back from being able to rehab their second-story apartments, then I think that's something we would definitely want to look at. But at this point, I'm not prepared to say, yes, that's it, or not. We need to look into that just a little bit further. But that's a good comment and a good thought, and it's something that we'll definitely keep in consideration as we move forward with developing the program.
Jennifer, can I jump in for a
Yeah.
minute? I just want to jump in and point out that that's a policy decision for the council on whether or not public funds are used to fund what others may perceive as maintenance of a building. That's a huge policy issue in any type of incentive.
Alderman Baker.
The history of this, Dave, is that building codes have changed over the decades. And if these apartments were never set up as apartments, meaning space that could have been used as an apartment or have been vacant for maybe decades, to go in and take the current fire codes, if nothing else, is so cost prohibitive that it is a huge decision we have to make. And one of the things that we've been told and time again is that a thriving downtown depends on people living downtown to shop in that downtown. So we do need more living quarters in the downtown. But the debate has always been, for instance, do we let Chodine do it? And we've stopped him because at one point it all of a sudden looked like he was targeting, they said they were targeting college students for their tenants. Or do we fund the difference between what it takes to get it up to current code versus just building new? It's going to be more expensive, I think, to get it up to code and just work within the structures that are already built there. And I think we need to open up our minds on that because we were dead set against it at many points over the last 14 years that I've been here. But we knew we had to do something, just nothing's ever been done.
Jennifer?
I'm going to skip ahead one. The next one is Architectural Improvement Program, but I'm going to skip ahead to the Downtown Architectural Assessment. This idea is focused on the idea of placemaking in the sense of community. The goal with this is to have an assessment of our downtown buildings to try to determine to restore the integrity of the buildings. Some of the buildings have gotten to the point where they need to be rehabbed. They are, there have been improvements that are made to them that are not necessarily historically accurate. And so the thought behind this was to have an architectural firm come in and do an assessment and give us an idea of maybe small, medium, and large projects that these building owners could make to their buildings to provide more of a sense of place downtown. The Architectural Improvement Program is the funding source for those projects. So the Architectural Improvement Program is a program that we've had in the downtown since, I believe, the year 2000. We've done about 45 projects over the years, and it's by far our most successful program. And I think the reason that it is so successful is that it's an easy program to utilize. It's not complicated. It's very straightforward. It's a simple reimbursement program. We match up to $25,000 of the owner's funds that they put into the building themselves. And I think that is something that we would like to continue to do because we see it as a successful program. I think some of the other programs that we're thinking about doing could very easily be modeled after that program to maintain that ease of use and to have people take advantage of it. The Pappas project, that's a placeholder for the Smalls Furniture building out on Sycamore Road. That's just part of the contract agreement. Mr. Pappas has not been paid out his full dollar amount for Phase 2 because it's based on the uses that he has going into that building, and he doesn't have, not all of the uses that he has in that building are eligible uses. I skipped housing rehab. Again, this is another successful program that we offer to our lower income residents that fall within the TIF districts. These funds are intended for emergency repairs, so roof, HVAC, those kinds of things. In an instance where it's a sewer situation comes up, they don't have the ability to obtain that funding. The city works with those residents to help work out those projects. Those projects are limited at about $5,000 a piece, and we usually do between 6 and 8 each year in each TIF district. The storm sewer improvements at the library. This is a realignment of the storm sewer at 3rd and Oak Street. The next item on the list is Oak Street reconstruction, so that is the if I'm saying it correctly, John, correct me, the overlay of the street and the repairs to that after the storm sewer project is done. Economic development incentives. This is one that came up as a result of one of our very first meetings that we had when we talked about this phase-out plan. The first group we met with said, yep, we love the Egyptian, we love that idea, we love this idea, love this idea, but what are you doing to get the students downtown? What are you doing to have more businesses that the university would take advantage of? And so we took a look at it and looked back on it and realized we didn't really have a whole lot of stuff in there to bring the university kids downtown. And so because we would like to use FY16 as a year to do our due diligence, as I said, we'd like to form some focus groups with the students and find out what is it lacking, what would you like to see downtown, what would make you come downtown, what are you going home to do? We want to keep you here in DeKalb, we want you to come downtown. What is it that we need to put there so that you would want to take advantage and utilize the downtown? There are some other programs that we've been playing around with, and we're trying to determine the best use of those funds and what would have the most impact. So we're still working on those. The next two items are a couple of airport improvements out at the airport. It's a site cleanup at Peace and Pleasant Street, so the very corner of the airport where you see the sign. There's going to be some burial of some electrical poles, and the heated concrete is the concrete. It's a project out in front of the city-owned hangars. In the wintertime, when it rains or snows and it freezes, the tenants in the hangars can't open their garage doors. So the purpose of this, which is counterproductive. So the purpose of this is to make it heated concrete so you can open the doors. Parking garage construction, probably the number one argument about the downtown. Is there a lack of parking, or is it a perception that there's a lack of parking? We'd like to do a feasibility study to determine that answer and just put it to bed once and for all. Do we need a parking garage or not? I can tell you as far back as the very first the Central Area TIF District redevelopment plan, it identified that the downtown had a lack of off-street parking. And since that time, we've made improvements to parking lots, but we've never done a full-fledged parking study to determine whether or not it's really perception. Is it because people can't see their destination? Or is it because there really is not enough parking? So we'd like to do a parking study to try to determine what the best location would be. Is there really a need? And put that question to bed once and for all.
And I would want to jump in there. This ties into a couple of other points. When you look at, number one, the library expansion, everything that we've heard from Dee Coover at the library is they right now average about 1,000 people a day that are coming to the library. With the library expansion, they're expecting to see a 25% increase in the number of people that are visiting the library on a daily basis. That means more people in the downtown. Number two, in relation to the Egyptian theater, that if the Egyptian theater is open 365 days a year, that is an assumption we'd like to look at as part of the parking study. We've heard consistently when we met with businesses, from the downtown businesses in particular, is the impact on parking every time the Egyptian theater holds and hosts an event. So assuming if the council directs us to move forward on the Egyptian theater with the air conditioning to make it a 365-day-a-year facility, that would be a critical component in regards to the parking garage. And the only other point I want to make in regards to the parking garage is, as Jennifer Diedrich just talked about, as we looked at this at the staff level and as we've been talking to the community members, we've talked about it having a transformative impact. A parking garage would do that. One of the things we'd have to look at is where do you put a parking garage to be able to host it? An important thing is when you look at all these dollars, and these dollars, you can look at how much is generated from the TIF, and it's significant. But if the council says, go in the direction, do a parking study, because we wouldn't want to build a parking garage without having a study backing it up. We need to look at, where's the impact? Weekends, nights, days, what time, are there particular days? So if we get the study that shows that a parking garage is warranted, then we're going to need the money to be able to do that. So what you're seeing here is conservative in the sense of what we're recommending for fiscal year 16. And then based on what direction you give us as the committee and the council, this will then play a couple of factors, and then this will help us put together the phase-out plan, which we'd like to seek community input ultimately in what that is. But we've had a number of internal discussions at the staff level, and I just want to throw out a range that if there is a parking garage, you could be in anywhere in the neighborhood of $6 to $10 million. So it's a significant investment if the council authorizes going in that direction.
Just a question, if I could, on the follow-up. As we think about that, when we say feasibility study, I'm assuming we're talking about the economics of paying back such a bond, you know, pricing, return, and so on. And they would be looking at the overall economic impact. I'm sure it's not just the parking revenue, but the impact on downtown of that. So that would, the idea here would be to try to do that study in 16.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Do the study in 16, and if, once we bring the recommendations to the council, if the council says to proceed forward, then we would put together a construction schedule, whether it is then doing engineering in fiscal year 17 and construction in fiscal year 18. Those are a lot of the variables, but you can start to see that when you're talking about air conditioning for the Egyptian Theater, a potential parking garage, those are two big-ticket items just by themselves.
Alderman Baker.
I believe every downtown consulting study has included at least one parking garage as needed and given different locations. But now that we have the library, I think this is perfect because the location of where the Feed 'em Soup is now used to be Matthew Boone's was the first choice, I think even 5-10 years ago when the last studies indicated we needed one. I wouldn't presume that's the most logical spot for it anymore. So I'm all for this. Wait and see what the experts tell us.
Okay, very good.
Jennifer.
Next item is the Elwood Nearing House improvements. FY16 is year 4 of a 5-year agreement that we previously entered into with the Elwood House Association for improvements to the Shirley Nearing home. They were donated that home by Mrs. Nearing in 2012, I believe. And there are several improvements, phases of improvements that they're making. They've been primarily focusing on the exterior of the building. In FY16, they're going to be moving to the interior of the building to make it available for tours and information center.
And before we go on to the next page, I just want to go back, and I know Jennifer has talked about this as far as the Egyptian Theater and has given an overview, but I want to go just in a little bit more specifics. We talked about the air conditioning. I want to talk about what was listed in here as far as the feasibility study. And I want to draw the equation to comparison to the airport governance study that the City Council has authorized. So that is currently going on by Sixel. We'll have a recommendation coming to the council in the next couple of months. The airport governance study was looking at what is the future structure of the airport, what is best for the future of the city, whether the city controls it, whether it's a regional airport, or you name it. So what we're recommending as far as a feasibility study for the Egyptian Theater is looking at what is the business model for the theater moving forward, assuming the council does approve the installation of the air conditioning so that they can go and become a 365-day-a-year operation. Is it the current model where it's a nonprofit? Is it the other end of the spectrum where the city could own it? Or is it somewhere in the middle of a public-private partnership? Or is there some alternative business model out there? So Jennifer Diedrich and I have met with the executive director of the theater who's here tonight, as well as the president of the theater board, to discuss this and get feedback, and has already done some preliminary research. We would strongly recommend that the council consider this because I can tell you from my perspective in the discussions, the concern is the current model is not sustainable, or we need to make sure that if we're going to invest into making it a 365-day operation, what is the best business model for it to move forward? The other thing I want to bring up, and we talked about in last week's meeting and might be touched upon in Director Haley's try to summarize and wrap up with the budget, is we do have recommended $25,000 in the general fund budget of a 50-50 match between the city of DeKalb and DeKalb County to go for operations for the Egyptian Theater in the next year. They're having some operational difficulties, and I don't know if I'm wording that correctly, or I'll defer to Jennifer Diedrich to say it better. But in order to be able to have them continue to function at a high level the next year, there's some assistance that is being requested. So I know we're in the process of the next week or two having a meeting with DeKalb County, but DeKalb County has asked us to consider a 50-50 partnership, so they realize the investment, they realize the importance of the Egyptian Theater, not only to the city of DeKalb, but to DeKalb County as a whole. So I wanted to bring that up, because when we talk about the feasibility study and the air conditioning, that would be in TIF. And when we talk about the $25,000 contribution, that would be out of the general fund. That is not a TIF eligible expense. So I just wanted to have all that information out there.
Thank you. Next item on the list is Wi-Fi, music, signage, and miscellaneous. The Wi-Fi project for Lincoln Highway, I believe, will be completed still in FY15. At the same time, they're installing the Wi-Fi hardware. They're also going to be installing speakers for the downtown so that we can have music playing throughout the holidays and throughout the year. It doesn't pay for the music programming, it's just the equipment, just to be clear. There's some increased signage that we'd like to do. We started a wayfinding signage program several years ago, and there still are some areas that need to be addressed. Miscellaneous is just miscellaneous. Those are opportunities that come along that we just don't quite know about yet. And finally, in TIF number 1 is our annual surplus distribution. That was a intergovernmental agreement that was entered into with the taxing bodies to secure the 12-year extension of the central area TIF. We declare 50% of the property tax revenues that we receive in the central area TIF as surplus, and we distribute those back to the taxing bodies annually. TIF number 2, housing rehab, similar to TIF number 1. It's the same program, it's just in a different geographic area. Remodeling and renovation. Barb City Manor, that is a building that we have, like the Egyptian, invested money in their capital, in the capital improvements to the property. The difference here is that the city owns Barb City Manor. Barb City Manor organization is the organization that manages the property for us. And so they recognize that as the TIF is going to be coming to an end, and there is going to have to be some manner of planning for the continued improvements to that property. City Hall Building Department improvements. Those are improvements to the what is now the police or the building department. If you've been down there recently, you'll see that a good portion of the area has been renovated, but the jail cells still exist downstairs, and some of the offices are being used for storage. With the addition of the property maintenance inspectors, there are some improvements that we're proposing to make to that area in that second hallway there, and then the sally ports to make them usable office space.
It's just to clarify, to repurpose those areas of the police department for a short-term period until the future direction of the city hall is determined. But it will help us as staff be able to utilize areas that we're only able to utilize for storage right now.
These are the former jail cells in that whole corridor.
Yep, that whole
You
corridor.
mentioned the Sally Port, but the check-in area, the fingerprinting area.
Yep.
The north side.
Yes, yes. Final item on the list in TIF number 2 is Founders Elementary Building Mechanicals. They have, Founders Elementary does not have air conditioning, and the school district had expressed an interest in wanting to install that because in the summertime, obviously, it gets very hot for the students now that we're going into the middle of June, and they start in late August. Air conditioning is a need for them, and so we have been working with the school district on developing a proposal to provide assistance to them for those mechanical improvements. They have 2 schools that are actually in the TIF district that need assistance. Clinton Rosette is the other. But for FY16, they're going to be focusing just on Founders Elementary.
And I would add that this is an outgrowth of the joint task force that the mayor originally set up between the city and the school district that was chaired by Tom Terzinski, and recognizing the need and the concerns that the school district has in order to be able to address some of their infrastructure needs. These are 2 of the schools that are listed in the school districts, or that are in our TIF districts. And it's important to note from staff's perspective is that it's very important that we partner and work with the school district, because the community is only going to be as strong as our school district is. And these are absolutely critical needs. We've had discussions as recently as yesterday. So what we would propose, if the council is receptive to this, is ultimately allocate $2 million out of the TIF funds to go to the school districts, and that we'd have an intergovernmental agreement that would call out the specifics as to what projects and be able to maximize that investment, that amount going to them. Keeping in mind, for those that in the audience that don't understand the exact nature of TIF districts, the funding that we're getting is from the increment of the property tax revenue. This helps the school district. It doesn't necessarily make them whole in the amount of revenue that they've lost through the years from the TIF district, but it helps them and it helps address some of their critical needs. And it will help the perception of, if you look at what that does to the neighborhoods, to make those schools more viable.
Anne Marie, I'd like to reflect midday conversation as that joint committee broke yesterday, reflecting on the progress that that joint committee has made. A year ago, I think we formed the committee. Quite honestly, we moved through a period of communication struggles between the two organizations. Could you reflect on the atmosphere concluding that meeting yesterday?
Incredible. I view it as a collaboration and a partnership between the city and the school district. I think we've gone miles in working and building our relationship. We meet regularly. Anytime there's an issue, we not only discussed TIF yesterday, we talked about a number of items, anything ranging from bringing them up to speed on the status of University Village coming before the city council. We have just incredible relationship right now.
Thank you. Thank you. And I wanted to share that with both finance and council. Jennifer?
That's the extent of our project list for FY16 at this point. We're looking for feedback from you and suggestions, recommendations, thoughts.
And the one thing I want to add before we open it up to questions is there are other items that we've brainstormed as staff that ultimately were part of what we were talking about as far as a TIF phase-out plan that have not been included until we know the direction of, number one, what happens with the ABC grant, because this will have an impact not only on the TIF but at the community. Number two, where does the council want to go in regards to the Egyptian Theater? Number three, where does the council want to go in direction to a parking garage? I want to mention as an example, because I see a member of the audience, one of the issues we would recommend to be in the TIF phase-out is allocating funds to the Elwood Historic District. But one of the things we would like to do is to get some input from the residents in that district as to how those funds can be utilized, keeping in mind that only the southern portion of Elwood is in the TIF district. So we're looking at recognizing the importance in the historic structure of that neighborhood. So I just wanted to add that if you see something or you say, why isn't that in there? It may not be there in fiscal year 16, but as we do the phase out and bring the full plan back to all of you based on the feedback that you give us, there are going to be other items that would be included.
Alderperson Noriko.
I have a question about the parking garage study, and its relationship with projected improvements for the Egyptian. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg question. I mean, does it make sense to do the parking study before any changes are made to the Egyptian, and one sees what the impact of those changes, the expansion of their programming might be? Or is it a matter that parking and the Egyptian improvements are so tied in together that you absolutely have to do the parking study first?
I think to answer your question, the need or the desire to do a parking study for a parking garage is based on more than just what the Egyptian is going on. I can take you back to the original plan, the redevelopment plan for the Central Area TIF District. As early as 1986, they recognized that the downtown did not have enough off-street parking. And so that is and it's something we have just never head-on addressed as far as a parking garage. We've improved parking lots, we've created more parking lots, but a parking garage, it's something that we've never taken head-on. And so I think the Egyptian Theater is one component
Okay.
that would necessitate the need for a parking garage. There are other things at play that are going on downtown. If is an example, the city center plan talked about a project at Library Square, so you have the library project going on, you have the Egyptian Theater on the other end, and then it's in between, you have that Library Square. So
And Jennifer, Anne Marie pointed to a 25% increase in library patrons are
Correct.
projected.
So I think there's just more, so to answer your question, I think there's more things that are necessitating the need for a parking garage than just the improvements to the Egyptian Theater.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chair Petal?
No, I heard somebody. I'm frustrated by this discussion. We've been sitting here with this TIF for 30 years by the time it's over, okay? And we're talking about the same things over and over and over again. 20 years ago, I took the city's parking stuff because I took a course on downtown development, downtown redevelopment. There is plenty of parking downtown, plenty of parking downtown. The issue is that the downtown is cut off by a railroad. You're talking about within one block of downtown, there's hundreds of spaces plus on-street parking. The issue of improvements to the Egyptian, they're not increasing the capacity of the Egyptian, right? So you look at the times when the Egyptian is full up, you don't need any more parking than you have now. You just need it for a longer period of time and a more extended period of time. We're talking about what does it take to get the students to come downtown? Move downtown west to Glidden Road, okay? How many of the businesses other than restaurants and bars are open in the evening? Nobody comes downtown right now for anything but restaurants and bars, even though there are other kinds of uses downtown. You also have a number of buildings downtown that are currently not up to their full use. You know, we're sitting here and we're gnawing in the last 3 to 5 years of these TIFs, issues that have been there for 30 years. And they're not going to be solved overnight. We're allocating $500,000 in the TIF number 1, I think it is, for economic development incentives. Economic development incentives to do what? You know, I mean, I am all in favor of making some kind of difference. But, you know, I thought about this because I have a lot of friends who had graduations here last weekend, the high school. Why would they stay here to go to a restaurant? Because there are no restaurants of family quality, if you will, west of Lincoln Highway. You know, there is no convenient, you know, places to stay or well, in this case, it wouldn't be places to stay, but places to eat without going through town. Now, a number of downtown businesses have done a very good job to adapting to the new downtown. And I think it's wonderful that there are synergies between the Egyptian Theater. And I think it's wonderful that we're talking about the air conditioning to make it a 365 day a year potential venue. But we're, in my opinion, and maybe it won't come out, we're not dreaming, we're hallucinating.
Alderman Baker?
Well, I need to take the other side of the coin.
That's what discussion's for.
And I really think that your point of view is what always won out, but it won out for, you said you took a class in it, or
Oh,
you
I've
studied
taken
it?
a lot, but.
Well, I wish I'd have been involved. I had a business that in approximately 1984, I finally gave up. There's not enough parking downtown. I don't care how many studies, I don't care how many ways you look at it, for retail business that has turnover. And there were 5 parking spots out front, but that wasn't enough, because if those were full, the main lot, which is across, well, it's Van Buren Plaza now, and when it got remodeled, I think they added only 2 spaces. That's where the parking garage should have gone. For 20 years, people that tried to put businesses downtown knew that. The perception that there's plenty of parking, the Egyptian seats 1,400 people. There's no way there's enough parking downtown whenever there's an event. And that's why we need some professionals to come in and look at this. The only parking lot in the downtown, and I agree the railroad tracks cutting it off is the problem, is there's 8 to 22 spaces in the parking lot by the Buick garage that was put in right before I got elected, and Chris Paulson made the statement, I will never vote for any more parking. Now, it was kind of very interesting the night that he had his fundraiser, and I had been arguing, Chris, there's never any parking down here in the evening. Well, he only goes out to dinner twice a year, he admitted, so he didn't really know. But when he came in to his fundraiser late by probably 15 or 20 minutes, he walked in and he said, oh my God, I drove around for blocks and round and 3 times I couldn't find a parking spot. There must be something going on down here. And I find that the problem is you can take snapshots, and that's why professionals, when they study this, they're going to come up with probably things I don't even realize as far as what applies today. But with this library coming in, and with the fact that the types of retail downtown have changed, and if anybody wants to make money down there, there's not enough parking. You can't get your customers through the door. There's no place for them to park. And the biggest problem is that the employees, and probably some of the managers and owners, they take up the prime spots right in front of their own store.
Dave, I want to make it very clear that that was not my opinion. That was given to probably the #1 downtown development consultant, and they looked at the maps, and they looked at the businesses, and it was their conclusion, not mine, that we did not have a parking problem.
They said the same thing for the city center plan, that there was no parking problem down there. There was some laziness issues. There was some issues that people don't want to walk 3 or 4 blocks to their destination because they were browsers and the class of businesses that have been down there.
Well, I mean, Dave, respectfully, Naperville, I remember watching that during this time. Every time I went there, maybe every 3 or 4 months or a couple times a year, I just saw parking lots on almost every corner. You couldn't look anywhere without seeing a parking lot. Parking lot, when we were arguing these issues, was up to $20,000 a spot. If you did one in a shortened area, it's probably 30 or 40,000 now, but say across from the Egyptian, because it wasn't the number of feet that they did the one at the university. And that's where I personally spent weeks studying that and brought a proposal to the council after contacting the engineering firm that actually built that garage at the university. And they said you can get them down to 12 or 14,000 at that time, 10 years ago or so, if you have a little bit longer number of feet to run, because the angles aren't so difficult to raise up. But 20,000 was the max, but we were still able to create parking lots by tearing a building down, and we were getting $6,000 or $8,000 a space. We need to attack this, because nobody is going to come in with a high-traffic retail, which is what we'd like to see downtown, if the perception of the Walmart where you can't see the front door, or the actual reality of you can't get the cars parking within a block or two, where they just want to run in and run out.
True.
And to go to the space discussion downtown, like the economic development incentives, could they help support getting some of the, I'm thinking of one larger former nightclub that's taking up a lot of valuable space downtown. What can we do to help mediate, get that off the space, get it turned over into something that will actually generate benefit to our community?
Tom Tarazinski.
Thank you. From an overall perspective, I'm glad to have the detailed review of TIF. Certainly appreciate that. I think one of the questions that came up early in the streets discussion relative to TIF and what the projections are for the kind of expenditures necessary. At this point, one thought I had is there's currently not a placeholder in here for repairs that had previously been in here and had been part of this for quite a long time. My suggestion would be to add a placeholder in here, at least for 1 year, of $1 million for streets, which I think is where it was last year, with the intent of looking at and driving down those potential economic deferred impacts that were present on the pie charts that look 5-year forward for the TIF areas in particular. There's plenty of opportunities for other areas outside if we can find revenue streams, but this is one I think is important that has a pretty sizable payback, not understanding completely the return on investment, but looking forward to that pie chart and seeing how much tips over into reconstruction at 4 times the cost. I think we should include that at least this year until these plans are further developed, because I'm concerned as we look at a parking garage, and why I raised the question earlier as we discussed that, is that it has to be viable. That is, it has to pay for itself. So I'm not sure if the thought here is that we're going to spend $5, $6, or $8 million and absorb that $8 million capital expenditure with not getting the dollars back out of the use and the parking fees that are necessary to pay a bond. Thereby, if that were true, there would be no net cost to the TIF for that from the standpoint of cost recovery for that. So I don't see that necessarily as a drain on the TIF capital need if in fact that is a viable pay for itself type business on the return. And I'm not sure how that would work, but I'd be interested to understand that as we look forward to that discussion on, the economic viability of a parking garage.
Let me turn to the city manager.
I just want to address Tom Trzynski's comment. As staff, I can tell you, we cannot recommend allocating funds for streets, but if it is the direction of the committee and the council, then we will go in that direction. But knowing some of the big ticket items that we could be looking at as far as a parking garage, if the council goes in that direction, you're in the, Jennifer, I'm looking at the air conditioning could be in the $3.5 to $5 million range. So it's not a small ticket item when we talk air conditioning. And I know, and someone made a comment that we're just dealing with the current physical infrastructure of the Egyptian Theater. That is one possibility, but I think if you asked Alex, that there would, the Egyptian Theater Board has a plan for a future expansion as well. When you look at allocating $1 million to streets out of TIF, you're basically putting a Band-Aid on an open wound because you're not addressing the long-term issues of all the streets that are out there. If the council and the committee wants to look at doing that, then I would recommend delaying that to a year till you have the full scope of everything that is in front of you. It's your choice, but I can tell you, staff, we can't recommend it because you're not dealing with the bigger long-term funding issue for streets.
Chair Peddle.
2 things. Number one, I will be convinced by facts, so I'm certainly not arguing against doing the parking study. The second thing, though, Tom, I presumed that if we put in a parking deck, there would be no charge. I don't think, and now, that's to be determined, and I appreciate the fact that you brought up that might be the trade-off, to pay for itself. But very quickly, what I was going to say is, and it goes to that particular point, you need to consider operational and maintenance costs that are ongoing. It's not just a matter of building it, but I would think that a parking deck would pose a different situation for the police department than an open lot. You can't see inside without going inside unless you have cameras and the like. So we need to consider the whole package, and if that's the best decision for downtown, great. One last thing is if the business is so dependent upon the Egyptian Theater, et cetera, and the businesses would be helped substantially by the parking deck, then when you move to financing, You may be talking about a special assessment, a special service area, business improvement district, all of those things would be on the table. Tonight's not the night to discuss that.
Yeah.
I just think as we talk about the fiscal viability of that, it needs to be part of that analysis as to how that would get paid back.
Sure.
And the impact here. As to the $1 million that I recommended, and I'm sure when we do the wrap-up, there'll be a series of recommendations that the Finance Advisory Committee will want to make to help the council go on a go-forward basis. But I would still suggest we do that on a one-year basis, because right now there is no funds. That would be money available for next spring. And if even 10% of those roads that are going to flip over in the next year and a half, we could preclude a 4 times impact to our expense and a nice return on the investment to get some of that off the table and reduce that $45 million even partially.
Alderman Jacobson.
I have several comments. Where to start becomes the question. I'll start with the most recent comment. Did you just say it's gonna cost $3 to $5 million for air conditioning in the Egyptian Theater?
Yes, I think it's in that.
When
I'm
we were
looking.
told 3 years ago it would be $500,000?
Yes.
And then they
That-
told us 900,000, and now it's $3 to $5 million?
Well, that 500,000, Dave, quickly became 2 million when specific
I mean,
engineering
at what
studies
point
were
do
done.
we say that this place isn't worth it? To have $7 million into a business downtown that can't even fund its own operations and be profitable, that scares me. I mean, we're talking $10 million that we spend on all of downtown to make it nice. We've now sunk that into one building, or we're talking about sinking that into one building the city or taxpayer doesn't own. I mean, do they make that big of an impact? We did the math at 400 or 500,000, and it was a 100-year payback based on what we thought the restaurant and bar and sales taxes that they generated were. At 5 million, it's gotta be a 10,000-year payback. At what point do we say a $7 million Egyptian theater and a $10 million parking garage, it's cheaper to go down there and bring a wrecking ball through and not buy it all and knock it all down? At what point do we say, like we are with our vehicles, it doesn't make sense putting money into vehicles that are gonna continue to break down when we keep injecting tens of millions of dollars into a downtown that certainly at this point isn't even close to being viable? It's not generating the taxes to even cover its TIF. We know at the end of TIF, we're gonna be in a shortfall because where TIF was supposed to come in and clean up the blight and bring that property value up, we're gonna be at a shortfall at the end of this after 30 years. After millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars invested, we're not even gonna be back to even on the city side on our sales tax revenue. That scares the heck out of me. I look at this draft and I look at this phase out. I think when I heard TIF phase out, it was how is the city going to wean itself off of the $700,000 or $800,000 or $900,000 that we've been stealing out of TIF to cover our operations. I think that was more what I wanted to see as part of a phase-out plan, as how we were going to make up for that $1 million in revenues that we were taking. To look at these things, we become a charity fund. We're funding nonprofits and non-tax-paying entities with this money that will have no return on. These aren't transformative, these are giveaways, these are social service projects. These are things, again, the places that we're giving money, hundreds of thousands of dollars to, are non-tax-paying entities. So we'll have really nice paint and really nice brick sidewalks and really nice falling down buildings, I guess, on the outside. At what cost? 30, 40, 50, $60 million? At some point, I think the feasibility study should be, what does make sense? Does it make sense to move a downtown west toward the students? Does it make sense to concentrate on our 23 corridor for our local business and for development there? At what point do we say this doesn't have the value that we need it to have and throw in the towel on it?
City manager.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to address all of your points. Number one, I would say the downtown is the heart of the community, and some may disagree with the the general tenor of the recommendation in regards to the TIF phase-out, but it gets at trying to continue to transform the downtown. It's never going to be where it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, but it can be a different downtown, it can be a viable downtown, and it can matter to the community. In relation to the Egyptian Theater, I think there's a couple of things to talk about. Number one, the air conditioning in a historic building like that is not as simple as putting in an air conditioning in a structure that's 10 or 20 years old that you're able to put in air ducts. It's a very difficult situation. I know Alex has worked with looking at how that air conditioning would be installed within the existing structure on the interior of the walls. So you have to keep that in mind. The other thing I would point out is it's a historic structure and that it has significance to the history of this community, and how important is maintaining that, knowing what that means. This is where the importance of the study comes in, because the study would look at the business model and what is the appropriate way to move the future of the theater forward. Is it the existing structure of a nonprofit that is only open during select events during the year? Is it a public-private partnership? Is the city owns it? If it is, what is the return on investment if the theater is open 365 days a year? Under what form is it open 365 days a year? Is it a movie theater? Is it a special theater? Is it like Arcada? Is it, I mean, there's all different models out there, Paramount, and Alex has gone through those and shared that information with us. So I think that's very important. The study is going to look at what is the return on investment and what is the best business model moving forward. When you look at the TIF phase-out, we did discuss the phase-out in relation to the general fund. And Director Haley last week talked about what we would do is we're basically taking the number of years in each TIF, and we're breaking out, if it's a 4 years left in the TIF, then we're dividing that in 4, and we're taking down that revenue equally those number of years. If it's 7 years left of revenue, we're dividing that by 7 and taking that down. So we're stepping it down every single year. So we are phasing out, and we're weaning ourselves off of that. Director Haley has looked at what is the amount, and I know the committee has brought this up in the past, that we have to take into consideration the increase in the property tax value, which she's looked at that, but there's still a decrease, or there's still a deficit which relates to an impact on the general fund in the future. So we have addressed the phase out there. And lastly, I'm going to point this out, and I'm going to encourage the downtown businesses. We've heard it through the different meetings that we've been in as to how important the Egyptian Theater is to those businesses. Whether you like the current structure of the downtown with the restaurants that are there, I can tell you we've heard directly, and I think we're going to reach out and encourage them to share that with you directly. Though the Egyptian Theater is extremely important to their future viability.
Alderman Baker.
For 35 years, I've supported the Preserve the Egyptian Theater, directly, indirectly, and it's been my pleasure on the council to be able to continue that. We've seen it go through many, many changes. When I think of downtown DeKalb, I can't imagine it without the Egyptian Theater. I knew that it was closed, and it was a great effort. I remember the Kummerfelts getting involved in that and getting me interested. I have not served on their board and been directly involved, but I've been to concerts, plays, weddings, art expositions. And you mentioned parking deck. It's never gained any steam, but maybe this time it might. Right behind the Egyptian, like I've seen and parked in Wheaton, Illinois, there could be, because of the topography where it drops on First Street going north down to Locust, there could be a 2-level parking deck. Talk about bang for the buck. You don't even have to do anything but sink some piers in and make it from the alleyway over. I think there's one business that might have to receive a windfall to relocate, but that would be far cheaper than a full-fledged parking deck or garage of 4 or 5 levels, whatever. But I want to see what the current day professionals tell us, because I know the history, and I'm hoping to get surprised at a possible alternative or solution.
Thank you, Dave. Was there a question? Connie Golden.
I was just going to just ask that when you do the parking study, just like all of the other studies, that you incorporate different towns. I'm sure you will, as far as, whether they have a parking garage and, what are the demographics of it. Because I know when I go to Sycamore, I can't find a parking place. When I go to DeKalb, I can. So, but they don't have a parking garage, but they have a viable downtown. So I would hope that somehow that would be incorporated in the study.
And Kathy's cool with that?
And I want to make it very clear, like Alderman Baker, I support the Egyptian Theater, and I cannot imagine downtown DeKalb without that feature, and for the reasons that have already been cited. I think it is an economic draw. It is amazing what the introduction of the Broadway series at the Paramount Theater in Aurora has done for traffic in downtown Aurora. And I'll tell you, the eating options right in downtown Aurora are not as good as they are in DeKalb. So I can understand the synergies, but there are multiple audiences that we have to serve. And, I'll be interested to watch to see how it plays out, because in my opinion, DeKalb is a much better community than when I moved in here 25 years ago. There's a lot more options. Some of that's on Sycamore Road. Some of that's downtown. I think downtown is better in a lot of ways. And I think that we are a multi-centric community that can support multiple commercial corridors. We just have to make sure, the one thing that isn't really defined is what are the functions of our downtown. Having worked downtown for close to 20 years in my career, there were a lot of people that went to lunch downtown from the businesses that employed people downtown. As a resident, I use downtown for the eating options. But it's never been a destination for shopping for me, unfortunately, because I think there have been some good shops over time. So to some extent, I think we have to decide what we want our downtown to be. We've asked that for 25 years, and I put it in a very blunt form earlier. But I think we have an identity crisis.
I'd like to, and excuse me for interrupting, Mike. I'd like to turn to Director DeVita.
I could probably talk all night about downtown, because I began my career in downtown development, and I've worked in some of the best downtowns in Illinois.
Helen, this is the conversation we had this afternoon,
Correct.
this morning.
Yeah, so just a few random comments on downtown. Anymore, as Alderman Baker mentioned, it's the new downtown, because we don't have the mix that we have with when you had all your department stores and your clothing stores. We're not going to see that. So what is the new downtown? The theme that keeps coming up to me over and over as I talk to members of the community, is today the 20th? Today marks my 6 months here. So I've been holding a lot of dialogues for 6 months with a lot of people. And placemaking through arts and culture, international restaurants, that's the main theme that keeps coming through. And I think that it's a good vision. When you get into a parking study, it's not only the cost of building it, it's not only do we have enough spaces, it's are they in the right place? This railroad track, how appropriate, divides us significantly. We have no office space downtown. We have a lot of empty second floors. For a downtown building to be successful, it needs revenue streams from all corners of the building. A restaurant needs to be selling its cheesecakes to another business. You need upstairs renters. So then you're getting into building code issues, of course. There's a beautiful space above Eduardo's. Rosa Bailly took me up there. I was stunned at how beautiful it is. It is totally gutted. There is no economic value to coming in through that space. And what I saw there was a Catalyst Ranch, an innovative meeting and space for corporate getaways. There's lots of vision for what could happen downtown. We could use some bed and breakfast types, some small boutique hotels. You talk about, do we take $1 million and put it into roads? What if we took $500,000 and put it into a hotel? Within 10 years, we'd have that $1 million back just on hotel motel revenues, not to mention all the food and beverage that would come from people that were staying and shopping. So that's the kind of transformative thing we were getting at with the economic development incentive line. And we need input from the community on what type of uses would be that transformative. What Jen mentioned, some of them are just placeholders, and we're welcoming input from everybody. So just downtown business composition, you know, that's a main tenet of the National Main Street Program, co-tenancy. If I shop here, do I also shop here? Are we sharing tenancy? And in successful downtowns, every year you'll see businesses relocate to be near businesses with whom they share shoppers and clients. That's that co-tenancy mix. You see it out on Sycamore Road. The grocery anchored shopping stores often have lease clauses that if the grocery store leaves, the other businesses can leave, because they're recognizing that co-tenancy is important for their operation. We have to be careful when we tear down buildings. If you tear down too many to make parking, there's nothing to come to. I think we haven't even begun to tap historic preservation here. Historic preservation makes us who we are. It tells our built environment, and there's tax credits available to the property owners. We've got to find ways to generate more income into these buildings. At the end of the day, there's property rights for the people that own the buildings, and we want to see them be successful and have restored, beautiful buildings that tell the story of the city. I think the main thing for me on the parking, I'll just say one more comment, is it in the right place? We have a lot of surface decks. Should some of those surface decks become buildings? And then we move the parking north of the tracks? I think that that's an important question for us.
Okay. Mike Verba.
And I echo Mr. Tarazinski's sentiment in that to get that $1 million placement back in there so that, again, I understand what you're saying about transformative, but I also see that we could be transformative by reducing the burden to our taxpayers for these improvements like streets and water.
Okay. Alderman Jacobson.
Knowing you came from Mount Prospect, and I know Mount Prospect well, I grew up there. Arlington Heights had a very similar project in their downtown as Mount Prospect did. What did those downtown projects cost? Again, those were 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old buildings that were replaced with a very nice mixed-use stuff. What would something like that cost?
Well, it's interesting you bring up Mount Prospect because of all the towns I've worked in, it's the only town that wasn't over 100 years old. Mount Prospect, I found this interesting. The first English-speaking church service in Mount Prospect, Illinois was 1937. It was a very new town. So I would probably refer back to my experience in Woodstock or Geneva or St. Charles or Oswego. And I would want to look numbers up. I wouldn't want to go from memory.
Approximately. Again, talking about a transformative project where you took a depressed, underserved downtown with old, difficult-to-use buildings and turned it into a beautiful, modern, very classic-looking, but usable and certainly tax-generating downtown.
Every town was different. Woodstock, when I got there, almost all the second floors were empty, and we used historic preservation tax credits and started to see apartments coming in upstairs. We saw restorations of the facades, things that had been totally bricked over, windows put back in, projects like that. St. Charles, by the time I'd gotten there, the city had, I'll say, bit the bullet. They'd done a really hard decision, and they'd forced sprinklers in all the second floors. And so the second floors in St. Charles were filled. Geneva was actually built mostly with single-story buildings, and a lot of the downtown activity there is in restored homes. So it's a different question. I could get you numbers, but I can't give you stuff off the top of my head.
Thank you, Ellen. Other discussion at this point? Recognizing the hour, and I'll defer to Director Haley to confirm with me that we're at a convenient break point with topics this evening. Was there anything else that you feel should be on the table this evening?
Nope.
Okay. What I'd like to do is move to the public participation at this point, suggesting that items F through L on our agenda be addressed in the May 27th meeting. I would encourage people, Tom Tarazinski reminded me of the final recommendations coming forward. That's item G The second item will be addressing on Wednesday, the 27th. So I would encourage everyone, look back in your notes at the previous meetings we've held, identify those areas that we need to discuss, and bring those to the 27th discussion.
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock? 5 o'clock on the 27th. At this point, I've got two citizens wishing to speak. Ray Binkowski. And if you could come to a microphone, Ray, either the podium or a convenient spot, please.
Well, thank you for letting me speak. For those that don't know me, my name's Ray Binkowski. I'm I'm going to give you a little bit about my background, not to brag. That's not what I'm here for tonight, but to give you a little bit better perspective and why I'm going to say some of the things I'm going to say tonight and why I believe they're important. I'm the former fat guy that's lost 60 pounds, kept them off for over 15, actually close to 20 years. I own the Red Athletic Club. That's our legal name, doing business as FitWorks. We've been open since 1978. We've had 5 locations. Some of you in this room have been members. Some in this room, I've trained your kids. Your kids have worked for me as their first job or career out of college. We change lives. We provide a vehicle for happy, healthy, and well. Things that we've done, I've had over 1,000 local athletes train in my facility, over 30 collegiate athletes playing sports for money at the college level. I've had over 30 interns. I've worked with the DeKalb Fire Department. I've worked with the entire City of Elgin's Police Department on health and wellness, even though they have a 40,000 square foot city-owned wellness center across the street from their police station. I've done work with 3M on prehab, rehab, injury prevention based on statistical evidence they've seen here in their local distribution facilities on how to prevent injuries that cost the company money and lost time. I've worked with the Sycamore Police Department. I've worked with the DeKalb County SWAT team. I've worked with local entire clubs, athletic clubs, from volleyball to baseball to football. I've worked with local law enforcement, seeking admittance, acceptance to the FBI Law Enforcement Academy, my signature and my measurement of their body fat, preventing them to have to meet the tape or satisfy BMI. I've worked with reserve units of the United States Navy at Great Lakes Naval Base here in Illinois and also in the field. Why am I sharing you that information with you? I would like to think I have a lot of experience and I know what I'm talking about. As a former fat guy, I know what it's like to be unhappy with who you are, uncomfortable in your clothes. I know what it's like to put a pair of dress pants on that you can't button. And I also know what it's like from the number of people that have come to my club and asked for help and been in a similar position that they don't need another barrier. Health, wellness, weight loss are things that are incentivized. They're incentivized by the City of DeKalb. You have a wellness program. Sauber Manufacturing has a wellness program. City of Sycamore has a wellness program. 3M has a wellness program. When I look at a 4% tax, that's a disincentive for people to be happy, healthy, and well. And not only is it a disincentive, but it's going to encourage people to do nothing. Some of them are employed here. Some of them will contribute to the cost of providing long-term health care, medical benefits, insurance, so on and so forth. Exercise, membership in a fitness facility is not entertainment. I will not dispute the fact that a case can be made that it is a social environment. It certainly is. We're certainly not entertainment. We provide significant value to people that everybody in the community benefits from. It should be something that's encouraged, not discouraged. I also know in talking to people, especially in this market, it is price sensitive. people will go 4 miles, 4 minutes in the car down the road to save a couple bucks. So by increasing the cost of doing business, yes, I can pass the tax on, but it means that some people are going to choose to go to our neighboring communities, spend their money there. They already tell me that they stopped for gas there because the tax is cheaper on the gas. They already shop there. Let's not encourage them to leave this community. One of the things that I've noticed in my operation, which I've owned since 2007, is the 30 to 50-year-olds are leaving. And we see that with membership cancellations and non-renewals. And we pose the question, why are you leaving and where are you going? Cost, schools, they don't care that there's a brand new school. The poverty rate scares them right out of the community. I have an individual today, he's a local chiropractor, is terminating his employment at a local chiropractic office to open his own facility in the Wheaton-Warrenville area. Property taxes on a home in Warrenville, similar size to something here in DeKalb, based on our conversation, are roughly $1,000 less. So we see that when we ask the 30 to 50-year-olds, dual income, husband, wife, married, kids, college educated. When I ask, why are you leaving, or why are you canceling, they say, we're leaving. Why are you leaving? It doesn't make sense for what we spend to live here. We can now live at or about Randall Road, east of Randall Road. There's more jobs, so on and so forth. The other thing that my concern is with the 4% tax, what does that do for our nonprofits? A lot of the shortfalls with cash flow are because we have too many draws on the system that aren't paying back in. When we look at the nonprofits or the giant white elephant, the university, and what they contribute, what about the nonprofit facilities? What about the city-owned Hayes Gym? What about the DeKalb County Rec Center that all offer some type of fitness? How are they going to pay, or will they pay? Or will the burden be placed solely on, if the proposal is passed, on the private sector?
Ray, let me just correct, Hayes Gym is owned by the Park District, not the city.
I apologize.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. I didn't know that, John.
Yes, sorry.
So those are my points. I would encourage all of you, those that have never been to FitWorks, to come see our facility. If you have questions, you want to talk to me, I'd be happy to talk to you. I did talk to an industry consultant that's been in the fitness industry for over 3.5 decades last week. He's a friend of mine. He said that he can now draw a line from Pennsylvania to the West Coast. Pretty much above that line, cost of everything and its impact on the middle class is impacting the fitness industry. And as a result, less people are doing it. Back to the disincentive for people to be physically active, happy, healthy, well. So again, we don't want to create additional reasons for people not to do something or make it cost more than it already does. The last thing that I'll say is I've sat here tonight for a couple hours. Everything I've heard was on the cost spend side of things. Who's in charge of bringing more business to the community? Who's in charge of population growth? The jobs. The jobs bring rooftops. The rooftops bring the people. When I looked at moving my business from Sycamore, for those that don't know, we're in the old Kmart shopping center where Hy-Vee is currently located. The numbers that are here today for the city of DeKalb are not what we looked at back in 2007 and 2008. Household income's fallen, poverty rate in the schools has ballooned, and a lot of the educated, higher income people have left, or even worse, they work in our community, they take their paycheck, and they go to the suburbs and they spend it where they live. So I would like to see somebody, instead of talking about spend, how are we going to replace the fact that Ideal is closing, expanding in Sycamore? What are we going to do to replace the GE factory? Oh yeah, we also used to do stuff for GE. Where's the next GE? Where are the engineering jobs? Where's the research and development? Where's the sales, marketing, advertising? I've heard Band-Aids used. Baker, I think you used it earlier. Heard that come up, city manager. 3M makes Band-Aids. They put cartoon characters on them. Where are the graphic arts jobs? Where's the manufacturing of the Band-Aids? Where's the adhesive research and development? They do it, and for those that don't know, by degree, I'm a mechanical engineer, and I worked in those industries for a while. Believe it or not, they do manufacturing in rural markets like ours. We have the highway. We're close to rail. Where are the jobs? So again, that's my 2 cents. Actually, there's one more note here in my notebook. Parking in the Egyptian Theater. I've promoted 13 contests at the Egyptian Theater and one event for one of the books that I've written. I brought over 5,000 spectators to this market. I brought over 1,000 competitors to this market from around the world. Last year we had competitors from both Canada and Sweden here. We have plenty of parking. I don't dispute what you said. I kind of agree with some of the comments over here. It's not in the right spots. Now, whether or not it makes sense to do a parking deck, and as Dave Jacobson said, maybe the theater doesn't make sense, that's another discussion. The parking's here because I hear it from the people that come to my events, and we get a few hundred, close to 1,000, parking sucks. It took me 20 minutes to find a spot, and I had to cross train tracks. So yes, the parking's here, it's just not in the right spot. And you're not going to modify human behavior. We're become a lazy society. People are not going to park and walk. If they have to park and walk, they're going to Sycamore Road. If they have to park and cross train tracks, they're going to Sycamore Road. So that's my 2 cents. If anyone has any questions, I'd gladly entertain them. Otherwise, I'll go back to my seat.
Ray, I'd like to thank you for your presentation and comments this evening. I'd like to thank you publicly for the investment that you've chosen to make in DeKalb and the very positive business that you have chosen to establish in our community and the services you provide. And very articulate comments this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm going to turn to the other citizen, Michael Hajishik, has registered to speak. You need to get that one focused, near future.
Some of you are probably tired of hearing from me. What I'd like to point out is that until we come up with a way to bring money to the town from the outside, not just pass around retail dollars from one spot to the other, we will never grow beyond where we are now. We need to look at our investments in businesses, as Mr. Binkowski said, in the engineering and the sciences. We just don't have those jobs. And that's going to increase the poverty rate over time. Now, the taxes here are a disincentive. I mean, I can afford them. And I'm not going to explain how, but I can. But not everybody can afford to live here. $6,500 a year for a house built in 1941. So that's property taxes. I know some of it goes to the school. I know where the breakdown. Most of you know I'm well educated into the tax structure. But presently, what I see in this town is a dead-end business town. I don't see any growth in the business community. And without growth in the business community, the downtown will not grow. You need to come up with something to do with the TIF and use it for bringing in outside industry. Without that outside industry, without that growth in business, this town is going to slowly die because the university is not going to be able to support all of us forever. Okay? Yes, it'll be a constant source of money, and we will be a constantly the same size town for a very long time. Maybe we'll be 42,000 in 10 years. Okay? But we're not going to grow if we keep thinking small. And all I see is small thinking. And I've been sitting here for a very long time. And I would like the the Finance Advisory Committee, I'd like you guys and some city people just say, you know, if you were thinking about some of the things off the wall and out of the box. I mean, everybody likes to use those terms, but, you know, another store downtown isn't going to bring people from the outside. It's just going to be another store downtown, okay? That may or may not have customers, and it may not survive very long either. You have to have people who are in my income range who want to buy things. I am a big supporter downtown. I know every restaurant owner. I know almost every store owner downtown. But I can't support downtown by myself. And I want you guys to think about that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It takes synergy, it takes collaboration. Some things are items that we can control, other items are external factors that we need to respond to, we need to keep our eye on. I'd like to turn to City Manager Gora to address some of the topics raised.
Sure, just two really quick things I wanted to point out. One of the conversations that Director DeVita has been having with business people in the community is the thought of trying to set up an incubator for industrial businesses. So she has been working, whether it's through NIU, DCEDC. There's a lot of different innovative ideas that we're working on at the staff level, and we'll hopefully have more to report in the future. The second thing, and more concretely, is on the agenda for Tuesday, May 26th City Council meeting. You will see an item called Project Black Bear that we are bringing to the council, which is a potential business that would relocate or that would locate to Park 88. So what are we doing? You're going to see a potential business that we could try to attract to DeKalb. That would mean jobs, businesses, expanded tax base to the community. So that'll be on your agenda, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Once you've had a chance to look at that, feel free to reach out to us as staff.
Thank you. Director DeVita.
Slightly different topic, but I want to point out we're going to have another budget meeting on the 27th. That's the normally scheduled Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. We'll hold it here in the building in the conference room. We've got one item on the agenda, and that's a proposal for a tow yard at the former Masco Electric at
Okay.
1888 State. Okay.
Thank you. Tom Tarazinski.
Thank you. Just one item for thought as you prepare for final wrap-up at the next meeting. I think Kathy Haley handed out a second view of the 5-year budget. Hopefully you all have that in front of you. And as you examine the trend line on the deficit operations for the general fund in particular, this is a 5-year general fund. First of all, thank you for getting us back to where we had always had a 5-year projection. I think it's essential for the council to look at this regarding all of its decisions on what's sustainable from an operations perspective. Labor contracts, healthcare costs, pension obligations, et cetera, all get rolled up in here. And when you start to look at the deficit is now in year 2, and it grows substantially through year 5. So as we come back for recommendations, I just wanted to get that on the table. We haven't covered this in any depth, just got handed out. But to me, it's an important tool for us to look at as we think about decisions and short-term commitments that have long-term consequences.
Chair Pedalo.
I wanted to make one other comment to put some things into perspective. We all understand that buying locally or trying to make decisions to buy locally can be very, very important, but every little bit helps. And I was doing some back of the envelope calculations that if every resident of DeKalb made an affirmative decision to spend $10 a month in a restaurant, okay? $10 over 1 month that you would have spent someplace else, that's $200,000 to the city based on our share of the taxes. That's substantial. If you spend $10 a week That's $1 million. So it doesn't take a lot to generate a lot of money. Try to make the choice when it's possible. Spend your money locally, and even if you just do it at the margin, once a week, once a month, it does add up.
Let me turn to anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak this evening. Okay. Seeing none, our next meeting, our joint meeting with Finance Advisory Committee is Wednesday, May 27th, 5 o'clock. And we talked about setting a 5 to 9 o'clock timeframe for that meeting. Anything else this evening for the good of the order? I'll ask, I'm sorry.
I do have
Director
extra copies
Haley.
of the 5-year, I saw you looking, so if you didn't get one, I have them.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Seconded by Lynn Neely. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Carried. Thank you again, staff.